Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Wednesday, April 27th. It's Hump Day, and it's the day before the NFL draft starts. It's a few days since the spring game ended. There's a lot going on, especially for that dude right there. So we are going to talk to you all today we're going to talk some football today. So I know Ryan's the recruiting guy, but as I said to y'all when I hired him, he can do a lot more than just recruiting. So we're going to talk about Notre Dame's football team here heading into the phase 3 of the offseason, right? Phase 1 is the winter conditioning program. Phase 2 is spring practice. Phase 3 is summer. And then phase 4 is fall camp. And then, of course, the season starts. So we're going to talk about the offense today. We'll talk about the defense here at some point in time next week because tomorrow we're going to have a draft show. Friday we'll have our mailbag. And so, Ryan, I want to kind of start off. It's going to really kind of go a few different ways. Number one is we're going to talk about things we like, things that we're encouraged by. Some of it can be stuff we kind of thought was going to be good. Some of it, hey, you know what? I wasn't sure how this was going to be. Then we're going to dive into, things that we have questions about or areas that still need improvement. And there's always for Notre Dame, Ohio State, Bama, Clemson, Georgia, there's things right now that everybody has either questions about or areas that need to be improved upon. And then number 3, we're going to kind of get into a little of the position battles.
Mm-hmm.
What are the battles that are open right now? What battles maybe could come open in the fall that maybe we don't think are open right now? And at the end, we kind of added this late. We weren't planning on doing this, but I just wanted to have some fun today. We're going to kind of make 3 early bold predictions, right? It's the way too early top 25s and all that. We're going to kind of do a way too early bold prediction just for fun. Obviously, we'll do this again as we get closer to the season and we have even more intel, but we're going to have some fun with that today too. And then, of course, we'll take some of your questions at the end of this show as well. So, Ryan, let's talk about the Notre Dame offense and really the takeaways from the spring that as we kind of look forward to the Notre Dame offense moving forward, the things that we're most encouraged by. And I think for me and you, there's one area we definitely are going to be on the same page on, and that is the running back depth chart. Now, there's questions about the running back depth chart, as in who's 1, who's 2, who's 3, who's 4, who's 5. But it's more of because it's so deep. But I mean, I whether it's the practices we saw, whether it's reports we're getting from sources, and then what we saw in the spring game, Notre Dame, in my opinion, is absolutely loaded at running back right now.
No, it for sure is. I mean, sometimes when there's no separation amongst the group, you're like panicking. You're like, oh no one stepped up. No one is the clear guy. No one took that, massive leap going into, sophomore, junior, whatever it might be. For Notre Dame, I felt like every running back on the roster showed a lot in this spring, which kind of gives you a little momentum and a little positivity. Where like, how are they going to use all these guys? Are there going to be 2? How many questions have we gotten? Are they going to use 2 running back packages? Are we going to get all these guys on the field as much as possible? That is the exciting part of this offense, is that there's so many different styles, but the fact that there wasn't a huge separation in a good way shows you that this running back position is about as stacked as it's ever been. I mean, honestly, Brian, in your time covering this team, do you ever remember a running back room this deep? Like, it's pretty insane to think about.
No, I mean, we've seen some years where there was some confidence going in like 1 and 2, right? I mean, but never this. Like 2017, I think was probably the closest, because Josh Adams had 2 good seasons, had a great freshman year, had a little bit of a sophomore slump, but his sophomore slump was still impressive, 900 yards, over 5 yards a carry. You had Dexter Williams coming, kind of as a guy that had showed some promise. You had Tony Jones, who was a guy I was always high on. And then, of course, we saw Deion McIntosh make plays that year as well when he got his chance. I say 2017 is probably the closest. There's been some really good 1-2 punches. Sierra Wood and Jonas Gray in 2011, Sierra Wood and Robert Hughes in 2010. You had a little bit of Armando Allen, but by that point in time, Armando was just not the impact player that that we thought he would be coming out of high school before the injury. In 2012 was a really good 1-2 punch with Sierra and Theo Riddick. Pretend 13 and 14 didn't happen. 15, going into the season, I couldn't say. Like the depth chart in 2015 turned out to be really good, Ryan. But did we really think that CJ at this time going into 2015? Was anyone like, yep, hey, mark me down for CJ Prosai stepping in and going for a grand after having never played running back in his since Little League football?
And then being like a 3rd round draft selection or whatever it was, right? Running back, yeah.
Right. I mean, he went into the first game as the number 2 running back. Josh Adams was obviously a really good player for Notre Dame that year. Dexter Williams didn't play a ton, a little bit in mop-up duty. But, I mean, going in, I didn't see it being that deep. 17, we talked about. 18, it was Dexter. It was, I mean, they had to move Jafar Armstrong to running back in 2018 because the depth was a concern. 19, you got to the Georgia game and you had one healthy running back, and it was Tony Jones Jr. So it's been a minute since we've really seen, and then 2020 it was Tyree and Kyron. Really, Jameer Smith was banged up. Sebo was just a nice short yardage guy. So to answer your question, Ryan, there's been years where there's 4 or 5 solid players that I liked, but there's never been a year where it's like, okay, that dude could start and go for a grand. That dude could start go for a grand. I mean, literally, if they just said, hey, you know what, we're going to pick one back and he's going to be our horse and everybody else is just going to kind of spell him, whoever they decide, I'm like, okay, he's going to rush for 1,000 this year. I mean, it's been a long time. I feel like this is what it must have been like for like Lou Emoji and Tim Priester and guys like that to like cover Notre Dame during the Lou Holtz era, because they were just like always loaded at running back. You lose Reggie Brooks and Jerome Bettis. It's all right. We're fine. You got Lee Becton and Ray Zellers ready to step into the rotation the next year. But that's where you want to be. And it just goes to show, like, it doesn't have to be a bunch of 5-star guys. Running back is one of those positions I don't think you necessarily need the 5 stars. I've got some theories about 5 stars and why I prefer not to have 5 stars at running back, to be honest with you, Notre Dame, in most instances. But it's a loaded group, Ryan. It's just the question is, and there's always questions within the strengths, right? The question is now, okay, you've got this group, they're talented, but it doesn't just mean you plug and play them. There needs to be some strategy to how they're used, and that would be the sort of the unknown, the thing that we need to see from this group moving forward.
Yeah, I think there's always obviously the niche aspects of an offense, right? Like you talk about guys being third down specialists, you talk about guys being short yardage backs, and I think there's definitely going to be an emphasis on kind of understanding roles, but it's such an exciting group because I don't think that you necessarily have to just make a guy a niche in this offense, like that. So all these guys, I mean, I keep talking about it, but the one practice I was able to see at Notre Dame, the open practice for the media, Audric Estime was running routes as well as anybody, in my opinion. Like, I think that all these guys can do so many different things. And one cool thing too, Brian, is like, I'm not saying that this is like a consistent thing historically, right? But when you see the teams that have been consistently good teams for the most part over the last like decade or so, the Alabamas and then even Georgia last year, they have dudes down the depth chart where It's not like they're not going to have 5 stars like Alabama has in the running back, but like there was years where Alvin Kamara couldn't get on the field because he was injured and he was behind guys like Kenyon Drake and TJ Yeldon and all these guys. And then Georgia last year, I mean, Kenny McIntosh was a high 4-star recruit and he barely played.
Kendall Milton, same
Kendall
way.
Kendall Milton was like a 5-star by a couple platforms. Like he's the third stringer to Zamir White and Cook. So yeah, I think the talent at the running back position is kind of a thing where you see the best teams in college football traditionally have a deep running back room. And I think that's a good sign of things to come for Notre Dame.
And we've seen it from, Clemson in years where they've been able to kind of just replace one guy with another. Their depth in recent years hasn't been great, but, they had Wayne Gallman in the first title, Travis Etienne in the second title. Ohio State's just every time they lose one back, they replace them with another. They've got depth. So I think depth is key. There's no question, but it's got to be depth of guys that can be impact players. And I think that's what makes this group different. There's been years Notre Dame's had 4 or 5, good running backs. The difference is like with this group, it's like if you had to put Jadarian Price in a game, you're like, you just put a home run hitter in a game. Now, it's not perfect. He's still a freshman, got to get stronger and all that. I don't know if he's at a place yet physically where he's ready to be like the 15-plus carry per game bell cow type of thing. I don't know if he's there yet, just physically, but his game is there, right? And he's going to hit some home runs if you can find a niche role for him. And I think that's the first takeaway is you've got a really good room. And I'll be honest with you too. I think there's some really good running back coaches on the board that I liked. Dylan McCullough was not a guy early on that we were told was like probably not going to happen. When that one happened, it's kind of like you look into the resume and you're like, this is a my opinion, the ideal fit, because he's coached in several different types of systems, but I really felt like that NFL experience was going to be really important for fitting into this offense with this running back room, because it's a group that, because they're a pro style offense, they're not a spread offense. You need a running back coach that can teach them how to do so many different things. And we've heard Coach McCullough talk about, I've got, all these different types of things that I need backs to do and all this other kind of stuff. It's like he understands, hey, you don't just have one guy for one, all the roles. Maybe you can, but you don't have to. You've got different. This is how you use different guys' strengths, because it's not as easy as it may sound. It takes some strategy. Your play caller has to know, like, look, when we do this, when this guy's in the game, this is our emphasis. When this guy's in the game, this may be our emphasis. Hey, we have this package put together for these two guys, and that's kind of part of the process, Ryan, in regards to having a really good grasp of what this group can do.
And to Coach McCullough, if you look at his experience specifically in college, he has shown that he can do it both ways too, as far as if he has a guy that has the hot hand, he has no problem sticking with that guy if that's the person that kind of separates himself. But he's also shown you when you have Stephen Houston and Divine Reddick, or you have Tevin Coleman and Divine Redding, and they're both good football players, splitting carries and utilizing them in the ways that make your team successful is something that he's also able to do. I think that's huge, because some guys, I think, kind of just get tunnel vision and say, like, that's the one known commodity. That's all I can do. But Coach McCullough has shown that he has confidence to play multiple running backs in their roles. And I think that's huge, man. Like, it is. And the track record speaks for itself, right? Like, he had Tevin Coleman over 2,000. He had Jordan Howard, who came over from UAB and had a fantastic season with Indiana. He was a part of the USC team that Ronald Jones had his best season. And one underrated part of when he was in the NFL was his last year. Not his last year, when he was with the Chiefs when they won the Super Bowl, Brian. Like, this was very underrated, because I think Patrick Mahomes won the MVP, if I remember correctly. But Damian Williams was really good in that football game, man. Like, he was a big emphasis on why they won that game against the 49ers. So Coach McCullough has shown that he can do it in a lot of different ways, which gives me hope that if there is 3 to 4 running backs that have shown capable, he will not be afraid to go to that ideology.
And I think we saw it last year from Tommy Rees as well, and a little bit more than we saw in 2020. That's for sure. I mean, in 2020, it was a little frustrating because they were putting just Chris Tyree in the game to do what Kyron Williams did. Last year, I think we saw a little bit more of that, where he, not so much with different players, but using the back in so many different ways. We saw more of that last year, and being able to use multiple players. Now we need to see if he can use those guys together, because what we didn't see a ton last year was, like, Logan Diggs didn't get his chance until somebody got hurt, right? We never really saw Audric Estime. We never saw them use 3 backs. We always saw them use 2, because Chris Tyree was banged up late. They didn't use him either. We do need to see that Tommy Rees can do it, but I think what I'm referring to is the different ways in which he used the running backs will make it easy for him to plug one guy in to another, because Kyron Williams could really do all of it last year. And there are guys on this group that can do all of it too, but you don't need to, in my opinion, because you have guys that can maybe do this guy's the better back here, but this guy's the better back over here. So you use those strengths, to really improve your football team. I think that's a big key for me as well.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the usage obviously goes in the passing game, especially. Like, I want to see if there is a running back or two of that group where they want to kind of function as that de facto third down back, the space back, or if there's an element where they think all of them can do it, because I do think all of them can do it for their own niche. And then you get into the conversation of, what does pass protection look like, right? Because that was like one of the underrated things. Well, not underrated by Notre Dame fans, but Kyron Williams was one of the best blocking running backs over the last couple of years in this draft, in my opinion. So he was a fantastic pass protector. Are these young guys up to the challenge to kind of, supplement what you're missing with Kyron Williams from that aspect? So impact in the passing game is going to be a big thing, because I think if you get Chris Tyree the ball in space, you get Jadarian Price the ball in space, you get Logan Diggs the ball in space, and you can even do some stuff with Audric Estime. I feel like that could be an underrated element of this game, because I think that you can create a lot of mismatches with the running backs that you have on this roster.
There's no question. And we had a really interesting question even before the show started, from Rob Osgood, that I think is good to bring up in this conversation as well. And he says, part one is, one thing that the Blue and Gold game showed me was the importance of the running backs, run and pass game. Is it your opinion that Tommy Rees will use more running back play early in the season to give confidence in Tyler Buckner, then open it up more? Nothing better for a young quarterback than a strong offensive line, running back that can run and catch a safety valve in the tight end. Thanks, guys. Love what y'all do.
I have mixed feelings about that, Brian. I do, because I mean, I think there's something to the fact of like letting a guy get comfortable, right? You get the run game going, pass protection's going well, and then you kind of mix in more passing as everything kind of the flow of the offense is going. But then also, I'm a big fan of letting the quarterback get going early, right? Like give him some easy completions, make things simple for him early, and then you kind of put a higher emphasis on it. But then there's other quarterbacks that like, hey man, they just want to come out and they just want to rip it,
Right.
you know, like they don't want that little, you know, jockeying in nice and slowly. So I think that, Rob, for me, it really depends on the quarterback, you know, like each of them tick in such different ways. Tyler kind of strikes me as a person that might just want to kind of let it rip a little bit early and kind of, because the big thing about him is I think Tyler has a lot of confidence in his arm. I think he has a lot of confidence as a passer in general. I think that understanding, I don't call them limitations, but like the reach of like some of the throws that you can make now is important for him early. I don't want him to be perfect. I want him to take some chances. So that's just my opinion, but I think it depends solely on what quarterback you're talking about.
I mean, look, Tyler Buckner's going to be starting quarterback in my opinion, right? And so let's look at it from that standpoint. I think, first of all, I think this team is going to run the football. I think Tom Reese wants to run the football because that's who Tom Reese is. And also when you look at like the opener, that's something you want to do against Ohio State. You want to run the football in Ohio State because A, they're not good at stopping it, and B, there is the notion of you don't want to get into an up-tempo shootout with Ohio State. So that is, I mean, we saw that with Michigan last year. We saw that with Oregon last year. We saw that with Utah last year. Just Utah's defense wasn't able to keep Ohio State in check. But they're going to come out and do that. But that's because that's more of what the DNA of this team is going to be. But I think that what I'm not saying when I say that, Ryan, is I don't see this like being 2020. Right? There's being a team that's built around running the football, and then there's being a team that's built around being conservative and protecting the quarterback and protecting the pass game and you're trying to kill the clock. I don't think that's what this team is going to be. I think this team is going to be more of a, hey, we're going to come out. We are good up front. We are loaded in the backfield. And we got a quarterback that can do damage with his legs. We'd be stupid not to be a team that's really good at running the football. It's going to be because of that, because that's what our strengths are, not so much protecting Tyler Buckner. Because I think Tyler got a lot of playing time last year. I mean, that's the thing. You don't need to protect Tyler. He's been in those big moments. He's been in those big games. He's played at Lane Stadium. He's played against Cincinnati. He's played, in all these situations. So I don't think you need to protect him. I also don't think you're going to come out and ask him to throw the ball 68 times like you did against Oklahoma State. That's the whole point. It's like because you're going to run the football. So to your point, I think there's merit, Ryan, to saying, hey, look, you can't just come out and ground and pound and then Tyler's first throw was on 3rd and 7 of a drive, right? You don't want to get in that situation either. Let him run RPOs. And that's what's so beautiful about the RPO system is you can throw the ball even when you're establishing the run game if the defense is going to overplay the run. And so I think they're going to come out and be a balanced offense that really thrives on being really dominant running the football, but also explosive and efficient throwing the football. Because at the end of the day, Ohio State may not be able to stop Notre Dame's run game. And Notre Dame may run for 250 plus and stay in that game or win that game, just hypothetically. They're going to go play Clemson down the road, and Clemson will be able to slow down their run game because Clemson has the talent that if they're like Ohio State could commit the resources to Notre Dame's run game and still not stop it.
Yeah.
They're just not good there. At least they haven't been for what we know. Clemson is. If Clemson commits resources to stopping Notre Dame's run game, guess what? They're not going to run the football. I don't care how good they are. You can bring back the 2017 offensive line, and they're not going to run the football. And what hurt that 2017 offense is when teams were like that, Georgia is going to overload you in the box and stop you from running. They didn't have anything to turn to. That's the difference in this team because I don't think it's going to be like, well, we're just going to run it until you tell us we can't. They're going to come in and throw the football effectively, but I think it's more of a, hey, you're still going to get your 280 passing, but instead of getting it off, 37 pass attempts and, 28 completions because you're just throwing it all the time and your pass game is an extension of your run game because you can't run the football. Your 280 is going to come off of a 17 for 24 performance, right? Like that kind of thing, or a 20 for 28 performance. It's going to look a lot like, when Ian Book first took over in 2018. They were running the ball well for a little bit there, and Ian was hitting the RPOs and taking the shots down the field, and he was going like, 23 of 34 for 320 yards, and they were still running for 200 yards in those games. So I think that's more of what this offense wants to be, because I think Kenny Moore had a great comment, and I completely agree with him here. I want to find Kenny's comment. I thought here it is. Kenny said, running or throwing doesn't matter to me this year. Just be dynamic, Notre Dame. That's all that matters. And I think that's the philosophy that Tommy Rees is going to have. And I think that's where a lot of the excitement that I have comes from with this football team, Ryan, is because, yes, I think they're loaded at running back. I think this offensive line is going to be really good. I think they've got the best tight end in college football, et cetera, et cetera. They got a dynamic runner at quarterback that if they wanted to run a run-oriented offense, you have a quarterback that could rush for 1,000 yards this year.
Absolutely.
If he's able to stay healthy. If you wanted to do that. But the thing about it is I don't think they have to do that, and I don't think they should do that. I think this is the offense that has a chance to be the most balanced offense they've had since 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's exciting about it. Now, can they be consistent and all that, which the 2015 team wasn't? Can they play well into November, which the 2015 team couldn't? Those are all questions that we'll have to find out. But talent-wise, I think that it can be that. But it's going to begin with the run game. You have to come out and let teams know right away, we're going to run it on you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because last year you couldn't. We're going to run it right down your throat. What are you going to do about it? Because then that creates those big play pass opportunities that Notre Dame is looking for. So, we're not going to be talking about like tempo this year. We're not going to be talking. That's not who this team is going to be. This is a pro-style offense that is going to come at you, and it's going to run the ball down your throat and look to shred you in the pass game. That it's not so much volume-wise, but yards per attempt, creating isolations, all that kind of stuff. RPOs, getting guys in space. I think that's what we're going to see. And that was kind of one of the things I'm encouraged by, and saw it more in the spring practices than the spring game. Like, I'm just going to tell you all right now, Ryan, you can attest to this. You were at a full practice, the only one we were allowed to go to. What we saw in the spring game isn't even close to the package that Tommy Rees has on offense. That was about as vanilla of an offense as you're going to see. People need to understand that when they're looking at the spring game. That was an extremely vanilla offense, and there's a reason for that. They don't want to show anything. But I'm just telling you, you look at the film from the end of last year, and you look at what they did in practice, I'm very encouraged by the scheme, because we are seeing the things. You have to do RPOs. You have to do it in today's game. You don't have to live in that world, right? Like, where it's just who you are, but it has to be a part of what you do. And what I mean is, you don't have to have an RPO on every single play. With their 12 personnel, the things that they can do with Tyler Buckner as a runner, you don't have to have an RPO every play, but it has to be a good dose of it, because it protects you in ways that you couldn't protect yourself in 17 and 15. And I think that needs to be a big part of what you do. But there's things that they do. We know, we've seen it in practice, right? We've seen it in games last year, that Tommy Rees, when he kind of was able to kind of finally take full control of the offense, he was doing more things to create isolations. I mean, it wasn't just the vertical, horizontal stretch stuff that they lived in so much early in the season. I think the pass pro getting better late in the year also helped with those things, because there's things they couldn't do. But I mean, how many times did we see early in the game and down in November that he was able to do an isolation that got Kevin Austin wide open across the middle? He was by far their best player, best receiver, I should say. And you're able to scheme multiple times down the stretch of him just getting wide. He did it on, I think, first play of the game against Georgia Tech, right? Did it early against Stanford. Things that you weren't seeing earlier in the year. Schematically, you weren't seeing those things. And so he's going to be able to do that. But when you're able to add a run game on top of that, it just gives you so much more you can go to in the pass game.
Well, and to your point about the RPO, element to an offense, it makes things really simple. I mean, for the most part, right? It's you're making a read off of how many numbers are in the box, right? If there's light in the box, you're handing the ball off. If there's not numbers that you're winning in the box, you're going to pull it. And I think that Buckner has the skill set to be very successful with that early on, right? Like, to keep those boxes light. I think he's a quick processor for his age. I think he's obviously a dynamic player. And an RPO that was utilized by a Jack Cohn is going to be a much different looking play potentially than a Tyler Buckner, because he also could have the run option off of that look as well. I mean, you talk about the play where he kind of threw it over the top to Chris Tyree heading down the sideline. Like, I think that settles a player in easy too, because you're getting a lot of easy reads as far as the passing attack. You're establishing the run game still, and you're not handicapping his dynamic ability. Like, he could still pull and run the football as well. I mean, to your point, Tyler Buckner could easily be 800 to 1,000-yard runner. Like,
if you wanted to gear towards that,
right. Well, yeah. If he was playing with Ohio State when Urban Meyer was there, and he could be Braxton Miller. That's
or
my
the 2017 Notre Dame offense, right?
Yeah,
I know where you're coming from. Right? I just want to make sure people don't take that as Ryan predicted that Tyler Buckner is going to run for 800 to 1,000 yards. No, our point is, if they wanted to be that kind of offense, to Ryan's point, if they wanted to be a Taj Boyd offense, a Woody Dancer Clemson offense, a Notre Dame 2017 offense, he could bring that to the table. It's just, you don't need to be that with him at quarterback. And I think here's the thing, like Irish won, and I give it, like, he says this great comment. Hopefully with 8 in the box, we can still run the ball against Ohio State. Cannot wait for that game. And yeah, hopefully they can still run the ball. But here's the thing, why?
You don't have to, right?
You don't have to,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
That's the whole point, is you need to develop enough, and we'll get to the concern about this later, but you need to get to the point where you've got the best tight end in college football, in my opinion. You've got backs that can catch the football. You've got good. I mean, we've seen what Lorenzo Styles can do. We've seen what Avery Davis can do on a big stage. We know that they've got good players. Do they have championship caliber receivers? That remains to be seen. But they have good receivers that, in isolations as complements to the run game, can at least be good football players and a great tight end. You can be a pretty explosive offense. So my point is, yeah, it'd be nice if Notre Dame could just run out and go 8 in the box and beat Ohio State. And that sounds great. But my question is, as always says, but why? In some years you needed to do that. In 2017, they needed to do that because they weren't good enough throwing the football to not do that.
Right.
This team doesn't have to do that. But so you look at the running back, you look at the scheme. I think the personnel fits the scheme that Tommy Rees wants to utilize a lot more than it did his first year, in my opinion, because you do have more speed. Here's a question we don't know, Ryan, and we'll get to this. Like, we don't know how good Notre Dame is going to be at receiver, meaning, like, do they have difference makers? Do they have a number one? Do they have future high round pick? We don't know the answer to that. But what we do know, of the guys that are coming back, they have speed. Now, we don't know if they're great receivers, but they can run. This is going to be Notre Dame's fastest receiving corps since, like, as far as practical game speed, since 2015. It's not as fast as 2015 because there's no Will Fuller, but it's the fastest since then. That also adds to what we think Tommy Rees is going to like to do, because, again, when you don't have great receivers, there are things you can do. Brian Kelly said this a long time ago. He never actually lived it, at least not at Notre Dame. He did at Cincinnati, but he didn't live it. But he made a point that's accurate even still today, Ryan, which is, on offense, you don't necessarily need elite players. And he didn't say this. I'm saying this. Right. On offense, you don't necessarily need a Julio Jones on offense. Like, let's be real. If you look at Julio Jones in his prime and Cooper Kupp in his prime, Cooper Kupp isn't in the same universe as Julio Jones as a talent.
Sure.
Right. But he's able to be dynamic because he's, his skill. He is a good player. But the scheme, if you were to go ask him to do things that Julio Jones did early in his career, Cooper Kupp doesn't have the numbers he had this year. The scheme, combined with his talent and his route running precision and all that, allows his numbers to be at a level that you'd think he is a Julio Jones in his prime, or right, a guy like that. And that's the point, is because you can scheme your way into success on offense, and they have enough athletes at receiver to do that, to complement it. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to the run game, which we'll get into more. I do want to talk about something, Ryan, that also encouraged me. And again, it's a work in progress, and it also is going to be part of the improvement aspect, but it also needs to be talked about here. The receivers and offensive line are not finished products yet, and there's still a lot of work to get done. But I was very encouraged by what I saw throughout the spring in regards to their growth. They definitely took a step from practice 1 to practice 15. From a toughness standpoint, the technique got better. You're starting to see some guys settle in as certain roles. I'm very encouraged by the growth that those units saw. Now, the success this season will be determined by what happens from here to September 3rd, but they made the necessary growth, in my opinion, that needed to be made from practice 1 to practice 15.
Yeah, no, I think you saw a lot of growth, and I think you expected it for some players, right? Like you expect sophomore Blake Fisher to take a big step. You expect Joel to take a big step because, I mean, usually a freshman to sophomore year jump is just massive, just in general, right? But the fact that you saw that much growth, I mean, it's understandable with Coach Heastand obviously coming back. But it's also huge to me the fact that you didn't have your quote unquote leader out there. You know, I'm sure Josh Lugg is a leader to a degree, but the best offensive lineman, most proven offensive lineman on the team is Jared Patterson. He wasn't even there, obviously, in the spring, right? Like he was there, but he wasn't participating in the spring. So the fact that you saw that improvement from practice 1 until practice 15 tells me that there's a emphasis from an individual perspective. Like they understand that last year wasn't acceptable, right? They understand that they are way too talented to be not a good unit up front. And having Coach E stand back, I think, is a big element in that. But I also think that we can't undersell, and I think people do too often, that there's a lot of talent up front, man.
Mhm.
Like there's a lot of talent. You honestly could be in the situation, Brian, if things shake out the way it looked early, right? Like obviously there's an interior battle that needs to happen at guard. But you could be in a situation where Josh Lugg is your least talented offensive lineman of the 5, which I think kind
Yeah.
of speaks. I mean, like him or
Or
Kristofic, right? Like,
there you go.
yeah,
I was gonna
yeah,
say who you're very high on,
yeah,
rightfully
exactly,
so. I mean,
exactly.
talent won't be an issue this year. And here's the thing that I've had a lot of people come to me and ask me, understand they're good questions. Like this isn't me taking it, they're good questions because they look at the spring game and they didn't run the ball great and there were some protection issues and they're concerned. And I understand that, especially looking at the past. But number one is you have to keep two things in mind. This was always part of the process, which is exactly why we said last week before the game that I don't care about the execution aspect of it. I don't. That'll come in April. I care about, are you competing and are you growing in the areas that were more toughness issues? Driving your feet through contact. Are you battling? Are you competing? I didn't expect them to come and push Notre Dame. This is one of the best defensive lines in the country. I didn't expect them to come push those guys around in this game. I thought they competed. The other part that you got to remember is the line that had been kind of working together, the starting line in the spring, did not play together in the blue gold game. And that matters. I mean, that part of it matters. And so, and you didn't have, I mean, like I said yesterday, Ryan, there was 4 or 5 times where the defense brought a guy screaming off the edge where I'm like, if Tyler Buckner's in the game, that's a huge play for the offense. You're not doing that with it, because Notre Dame I didn't see a single RPO on Saturday. Not one. I didn't. I didn't see a single read zone on Saturday. Not one. So you all have to understand that, and part of that too was challenging the line. Hey, we're not going to give you those outs. We're not going to give you that protection. We're not going to do those things. We want to see how you handle the competition of it. We want to see how you handle competing. We want to see how you handle adversity. I think that was all part of the process. But from step 1 to step 15, both of those units saw growth. We saw plays. I think it was Deion Colsey. He had a play. It was the play. You know what it was, right? I think it was the play where he would have scored a touchdown had Buckner got the ball up. But he did this really nice, and I have to go back and watch it again because I think this, but he did like this really nice, like hard jab outside and got the guy to jump and he rips inside because he's running an in cut. So he knew I got to get inside. I can't just let this guy wash me inside. Jabs him hard outside, gets the guy to bite, slips inside of it, and then stems back out and then breaks inside. It gets open. And if a quarterback throws a decent ball there, it's a touchdown, right? Like that's a guy that people are complaining about for some reason.
Yeah.
As far there was times where I saw Braden Lindsey with a good release, and then there was other times like the play where he actually ends up making the catch. He just basically does a half-hearted move and then just easily runs outside and Chance Tucker's all over him. So again, there are works in progress, but there was other snaps where like, okay, you saw that hard jab and then slip and then get back out. We saw guys stacking We saw guys stacking DBs in the game on Saturday.
Are you allowed to do that? I didn't know
Yeah,
you were
you're
allowed to
allowed to
do
do that
that.
in college football, right? I know. It's just completely read the rules wrong in the past. We didn't think we could do that. So, but then there's other places they didn't do it. That's part of the evolution of your team because, again, it's 15 practices in. You'll have at least 40 before the first game. And so to me, that was an improvement, like especially for the receiving core, because look, let's be honest. I assume I'd have been shocked if they didn't show improvement on the offensive line. You've got one of the best in the business. The other guy, Chancey Stuckey's been a receivers coach for a year, 1 year,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah, he did some nice things at Baylor, but this isn't Baylor, So it was nice to see that competition. It was nice to see young guys coming out and playing well. It was nice to see that. Jaden Thomas played well. When I went back and watched the game, I thought Deion Colsey played a lot better than I thought he did, because there were times when, like, if the quarterback throws him the flipping ball, if Tyler Buckner, or not Tyler Buckner, if Drew Pine just does two simple things, properly read a squatted corner in the red zone and just throws an in cut a foot higher, Deion Colsey has 2 touchdowns in the game.
Right.
And the conversation is completely different about him.
Yeah.
And so I was encouraged by what I saw, because number one, I wasn't expecting this to look like a mid-season form group. I saw the improvements. I saw enough of okay, that's what I'm looking for. We saw them competing for footballs, right? I mean, Braden Lindsey made a great catch, but we also didn't see them throw the ball downfield a lot. And that's something that we did see. You did get a chance to see some of that, though, in practice, and they battle. They battle for the football. So we're seeing improvement. And so at the very least, we know they're going to be coached much better than they were last year. Will it be at an elite level? That remains to be seen. But they're at least a significantly more fundamentally sound unit than they were a season ago.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is there's an attention to detail. Like you could see it with, obviously, Coach Easton, working through contact, being physical, running your feet on contact, playing through the whistle. Like, those things are all emphases. I don't know what the word is there. It's a big emphasis, though, for Coach Easton's coaching, right? And then you watch Chancey Stuckey, which I saw in live in person, and you're working releases, you're working, how to get off a press, you're doing all those types of things, working at the catch point, all those finer details to being a good football player at their position. There's an attention to detail, and I think that cannot be undersold. The fact that Notre Dame does not have a talent deficiency. There's not a talent deficiency. It's the fact that they have not been enough harped on the details of playing the specific positions. If they can do that, I think you're going to see Lorenzo Styles make a huge jump. You're going to see Deion Colsey maybe make a huge jump. You're going to see these offensive linemen look worlds better than they did last year, because it's not a talent issue. It is a fact that they just were not fundamentally sound all the time.
Let's transition to the areas that we think Notre Dame needs to improve and continue to get better and stay along the same line. Because I literally have on here my number one thing I was encouraged by, O-line receiver improvement. My number one question is, how much better will they continue to get? Right? I mean, because that's if we're going to be objective, what we saw in the spring was growth. That's what we wanted. But it can't stay here, right? Like, that's the thing. And the coaches don't want that. They're not like, hey, we've arrived. I can promise you that. That's not what they think. The question is, how much better is it going to get? Right. And that's the thing that remains to be seen. Now, I'm fully expect the offensive line to be there. The receivers is the one, because the receivers, there's depth issues. And again, I love what I've seen from Chancey Stuckey so far, but in this world, it's you got to show me. And the only way you can truly show me is on the field, where Coach Easton's had a chance to look 2 times in his last 3 years in Notre Dame. He put the best offensive line in the country on the field. Let's be honest. In the down year, 2016, they had 2 All-Americans. Right. I'll take that. Right. I mean, the down year in 2016 was better than most of the last 5 years, with the exception of 2020. So I know he's going to get that line ready to go, but we still need to see it. The bigger question is Chancey Stuckey, but I'm going to be honest with you, Ryan. I am a lot more encouraged about it getting there now, after seeing Coach Stuckey for, what we saw and seeing the spring game, than I was when it started, where I was hopeful, but it was a big unknown. But how the growth from now until then is to me one of the big question marks. And it's only first because of the transition aspect of it. It's not necessarily my biggest question mark moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think at worst it's going to be better than it was, right? Like, I don't think there's any question about that. What you're kind of referring to, in my opinion, is there has to be exponential growth, right? Like, you can't hit a point and then plateau. Like, especially now, like, this needs to continue through summer. Guys sticking to their workout regimens, sticking to their nutrition, all that good stuff. And then when you hit fall, then you have another nice little bump, and it's just about consistently getting better. Like, you hear that a lot, but exponentially speaking, you can't plateau. Like, you don't want to plateau, especially not in the spring. Like, that could be the worst case scenario. So you're optimistic, of course, but we can't get ahead of ourselves. Like, there's still a lot of work that has to be done. There's no question about that.
Right. The other question I have, obviously, I think depth at receiver still a legitimate question mark because I'll say this: if everybody comes back healthy, I expect the receivers to be just fine because we saw the spring. You've got Lorenzo, you've got Braden Lindsey. We got a chance to see Jaden Thomas really step up and play well. We got a chance to see Deion Colsey, who's still very much a work in progress, but again, I think he's showing growth. You'll have Tobias Merriweather back or arriving this summer, who was my highest ranked receiver of the last 10 years coming out of high school for Notre Dame. Guy that we ranked in the top 50 for SI 99 or in the SI 99 for SI All American. And then you get Avery Davis and Joe Wilkins back. Look, that's plenty of depth for a football team. The question, however, is will they stay healthy? Number one, which is a legitimate question because there's several guys on the list who haven't been able to stay healthy. Joe Wilkins had a couple injuries. Avery Davis had the big knee. That was the only injury he's ever really had that I can remember. Braden Lindsey's been a guy that has had trouble staying healthy. So Jaden Thomas has been banged up the last 2 years. It's a legitimate question. And then the second part of it is, yes, it's fine that you stay healthy, but the next part of that is, though, Ryan, is will Avery Davis and Joe Wilkins be at their top form? That's a bigger question, especially for Joe because he had the second injury. But even Avery Davis, with knees, nowadays, Ryan, it's like guys come back sometimes faster and stronger than they did before. The problem with Avery is his injury happened in November. Right. That's my concern there. So depth at receiver to me still is one of the bigger question marks. No matter what we think of the talent, I didn't say they lack talent at receiver.
No,
I said they lack depth, and that depth is going to be tested this season. No question about it.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we get the question almost every podcast about, is there a running back that you would potentially use in the slot a ton to take those reps away?
Or are they going to go to the portal for another receiver,
right,
which they are trying to do?
Right, exactly. I mean, I think that there's ways that you could supplement that, obviously, with the tight end room as well. Like, you can give Michael Mayer more snaps in the boundary or in the slot. Like, there's ways that you can figure out that depth issue, but as long as everybody's healthy, I'm not worried about that scope of it, right? But it is to your point. If Joe can't get back to a reasonable state, if Avery Davis has a setback, let's say, then you're in a really bad spot because now not only are you depending on younger players fully now at that point, a bunch of sophomores and freshmen, also, what if one of them gets hurt? So, you're just playing with fire at that point. You're playing now with experience and a low margin for error in terms of injury. So it definitely makes you unsettled. So, you have to hope that not only does Tobias Merriweather come in and he's ready to contribute, because I know everyone's excited about him. I know you are. I know I am, that he can come on the field and he could contribute this year, produce in some fashion. But what if he shows up and he's not ready? Then you're
or he gets hurt, or
exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, because some guys just come and it's a hard transition. It's not easy for a guy to just step on campus and just be an immediate contributor, even if he's extremely talented. So there's a lot of question marks if a couple of those things do not go well and you're putting yourself in a really bad position. So look, they're keeping their eyes on the portal in case there's a situation that makes sense, right? But even that situation, that's a depth piece, right? You don't want that guy to have to be a dude. You don't want that to be the situation.
Those guys aren't coming to Notre Dame. They're not. That kind of player is not transferring to Notre Dame right now because, number one, they do have some depth pieces. And number two, if it's a veteran player, he's that good of a player, he's in the NFL, right? He's getting ready for the NFL draft right now. So that's the reality. Is any receiver they get in the portal, most likely is going to be a guy that's going to be a depth piece. Right. I mean, like somebody talked about when the kid from Louisville just jumped into the portal the other week. A buddy of mine sent it to me and he's like, what do you think of this guy? And I'm like, it's really good, but I promise you he didn't jump in the portal wondering what school he was going to go to. He jumped in the portal because he knew he was going to Alabama. Right. I mean, that's just the reality. They let it wait for a few days to make it look good. But kids like that, big time players don't jump in the portal, be like, okay, well, I don't want to be here, so let me figure out where I'm going. No, they're smart enough to know because they have people pushing them like, hey, let's figure out where you're going to go first, then we'll jump in the portal. Because then and sometimes it'll happen the other way around. Like the Mims kid, he jumped in. It sounds like it was an emotional decision. He ended up coming back and all that other weirdness. That's a rare case. Most of these kids jump in the portal and they know where they're going. And that's the reality of it. So it's not always, but it's most of the time, and that's why you're not going to most likely get a portal guy that's going to come in there and be a difference maker.
Right.
You have those guys. You just need to develop them and hope that they're healthy.
Exactly.
That's a big key. And Jake Piper made a comment. He says ACL is no longer a full year recovery for everybody. Players can come back in 6 to 8 months from it. Don't disagree with that, Jake. But here's the deal, though. The one thing that you don't know is, will a guy come back and be as strong, as sharp, and all that? You can come back healthy from an ACL in 6 to 8 months. There's no doubt. It's amazing what medical technology has done, because an ACL is not the debilitating thing it used to be, but it is still a thing where your body is no longer composed the same way it was before. That's just the reality. And not everybody comes back faster, strong. Some do, and more so now than used to, but it's not a given. So the point is, with Avery, I hope that he's able to come back and be the player he was when he got hurt, if not better. But until we see it, there's the question, and that's the whole thing about this, Ryan. It's almost called you Vince. Sorry, Ryan. If everything goes according to plan, Notre Dame's going to be just fine at wide receiver.
Right.
But we're not trying to live in the world of accepting what ifs as if they're all going to pan out, because that's not the real world. Right? I mean, it's just not. And hopefully it does, but in normal cases it doesn't. So you've got to figure out, okay, well, which one's not going to pan out? And who that answer is going to tell us a lot about, how this team is going to be. So
you got to hope for the best, plan for the worst, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the situation especially when you're a team that, you have to prepare just in case, because you're dealing with guys that are coming off the injury anyway. So, I mean, you've already been dealing with kind of, I don't want to say the worst case, but situations that are unclear for sure. So it's something that you have to work through, and you have to be confident in. There's a plan B just in case.
Yeah. We'll talk about this more in the depth position battle, the position battles, but the second tight end is still a question mark for me. I wasn't blown away by what I saw from the guys in that competition. And then Kevin Bauman got hurt again. And I've heard it's a potential, not a major knee injury, but I've heard it's something that's going to require, some rehab or some work or something like that. And that's been his thing. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy. Mitchell Evans did some nice things, but I think he's probably still a year away from really tapping into his potential, unless he's able to make some big growth from now until August, which, with that kid wouldn't surprise me a whole lot. But that's still a question mark for me. Especially when you couple it with the fact that the receiving depth is a question mark. Like that's the one combination for me that's concerning, is the questionable depth at tight end, because Bauman's has an injury history. Kane Barong's coming back from an injury. And again, until we see, Kane has 0 career catches. Like, I think the kid could be a really good player, but he's never caught a pass yet. I don't want to just assume this isn't a fanboy show where like, well, he was this, so everybody's going to be phenomenal. He's got to show it to me, right? I think he's got the ability. And then you got 2 freshmen coming in who are super talented, but again, they're freshmen. There's just a lot of what ifs. And so when you combine the 2 tight end, the number 2 to 3 tight end question marks with a lack of depth at receiver, it can be problematic. Because if George Takis was back, because we know what he can do, the depth at receiver can be alleviated by the fact that you're loaded at running back and you have 2 legitimate, like, known commodities at tight end.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, Mitchell Evans and Kane Barong and Bauman are competing for that 3rd tight end spot.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where I'm at, is that combination is a little bit concerning for me. And we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. The final one for me, the final sort of question mark that I still have about this football team is quarterback. And it's twofold for me. Number one is, I have 0 doubt that Tyler Buckner is healthy. He's going to be a really good player for Notre Dame this year. He's going to have his, young guy mistakes. This is going to happen. He's also a little bit of a gutsy kid. He's going to try to make some throws that nobody else on this roster will even think about attempting to make. And there's going to be a couple times where it's going to get him in trouble. I'll take it. That's just me. I don't love turnovers. I never accept turnovers, but I can live with it. How about that? Because it's also going to mean he's going to make some plays. But he still has a lot to prove, right? Like, he played a lot last year, but not in the role that he's going to be playing in this year. But the bigger question for me isn't so much, will Tyler be good? It's, will Tyler be able to stay healthy?
Right.
And I think some people are making too much of his injury history, and some people are not taking it as serious enough. I
Mhm.
think it does need to be addressed that, okay, we don't know if Tyler can play a full season at his style, and that's a question mark for me because if Drew Pine is the guy he was last year, they're going to be fine. But we have seen quarterbacks at Notre Dame regress. Sometimes it's the coaching, sometimes it's the kid. We've addressed that. Drew Pine regressed in the spring. Now that doesn't mean he can't get back on track and moving forward. He can. But we also have to accept the fact because what you saw, Ryan, in the practice you were at, and what Vince saw in all the other practices he was at, and the practice that Sean was at, Sean was the two practices as well, is what we saw in the spring game from Drew was not a one-off. And that's the concern. So quarterback for me is still the one. It's not a problem area. It's a question that needs an answer. And I
Right.
think it's a twofold question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it's quite simple. You need Tyler Buckner to be the player he can be. And you need him to be available, obviously. But you have to also, again, preparing for the worst case. And the worst case is that he goes down, right? And that you have to rely on another quarterback. And I thought, honestly, Brian, and I know that there's some context to the situation because he didn't push the ball down the field a lot and all that stuff in the practice that I was at or the game. Steve Angeli looked pretty good, but you don't want to have to depend on Steve Angeli in 2022.
No,
Like you just don't
that's
want to do
unfair to
that.
Steve. That's putting him in a position to
100%.
fail.
100%. No, I mean, not many people are built for that, right? Like there's a lot of guys that just aren't ready for that type of situation.
It's a
And
kid
although
that didn't throw for over 3,000 yards in his entire high school career. COVID related, but that's the
sure.
COVID affected Steve's experience level. His junior year, he played like 6 games because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And then this last year, he's a good player. He threw for like 1,700 yards this year.
Right. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, you have to have a backup plan, right? And Drew Pine is the only way that you have a backup plan this year. He has to be a good, solid football player. He has to. If he's pressed into action, I mean, we saw him last year. I wouldn't even say that he was just like a facilitator and he could just get it done. Like he had some nice moments, man, where he like was not afraid of the moment. You need that guy. You need that guy. Because even if he's just a backup, that gives you such a baseline. At least you're not scared. You can run your full offense because you're not afraid that Tyler Buckner might get injured again. You know, like you're not hindering yourself.
Yeah, because like somebody brought up the Wisconsin game. Somebody who's not high on Drew, and he brought up the Wisconsin game. He's like, well, he fumbled the ball and it allowed Wisconsin. Yeah, it was like his first drive of the game. He got hit from the blind side. That was a mistake. But what we learned about that and what we talked about at the time was, but look how he responded to it. The next drive he comes in, he's complete. He goes like 4 of 4, completes a 3rd and 5 pass to Kevin Austin, hits Michael Mayer up the seam on a beautiful throw, and then looks off his left side and comes back to Kevin Austin, his 3rd read to hit him for a touchdown to make a 17-13 game, a 24-13 game. You know, we saw it against Cincinnati. He comes into the game, they're down 17-0, and he leads them on 2 touchdown drives, to get him back in that game. Now, again, he also showed his limitations in that game. And that's why you don't want it to be a full-time thing. But he can come off the bench and win, get you out of a game and win you a game, or maybe even bring you back if there's an injury. But it has to be because he's growing off of the guy he was last year, not playing like the guy he was in the spring. And that's the question mark for me. And then we had a question here. DC Irish with a really good question. DC Irish 1213. Do you guys think this is the year that Tommy Rees will be judged on the development of Buckner and other quarterbacks? 100%. You cannot blame Brian Kelly for this season.
Right.
Like you can't. And look, and I'm the biggest Kelly hammer out there. Let's be honest. I'm not taking pride in it. It's just a fact. I've been hammering Kelly for years. And I am more than willing and able and ready to blame Brian Kelly for the things that Brian Kelly deserves blame for. If the quarterbacks don't improve in 2022, it's not Brian Kelly's fault. It could be bad luck, something like that, but it's not Brian Kelly. It's up to Tom Rees. Now, my thing is, that's part of the reason why I have the optimism I have about the quarterbacks, Ryan, is I think Tommy is doing a good job and will continue to do a good job. So, but if he doesn't, there's nobody else to kind of put that blame on.
Yeah, no, I mean it's make it or break it type of year, and I'm not. Let me retract that. It's a big prove it year, right?
Yeah.
Like this isn't a make it or break it
Right.
because there's a possibility that Tyler Buckner takes a nice step forward, but he's not the best of Tyler Buckner, right?
And
Like you can't
Tommy's
expect
29, right? Like
exactly.
you're
Yeah,
not in a not in
exactly,
a make or break year when you're a 29-year-old coach.
exactly not. Yep.
But I think you're the way you reset it is right on, right?
Mhm.
It's a prove it year, right? There's a lot of talk about Tommy Rees as this brilliant young offensive mind. I agree with it. There's a lot of talk about how Tommy Rees is got the ability to be a really good quarterbacks coach. I agree with it. I
Sure.
watch him in practice. I see things. I hear the communication, and I'm like, okay, like this is good. Like remember when I saw Mike Sanford in practice, I'm like, this guy doesn't have a clue what he's doing. I don't have that concern with Tommy. Now, but again, Ryan, it's like, okay, but now we need to see it with the results on the field.
Right.
But I'm optimistic that it's going to be the case. I'm confident that it's going to be the case. But if it's not, to DC's point, then yeah, that responsibility lands squarely on Tommy's shoulders. And you know who else is going to feel that way? Tommy Rees.
Sure.
Right. From what I know of Tommy Rees, and I don't know him very well, you won't hear him being like, well, it's not my fault. It's Kelly's fault. It's Chancey's fault. It's Harry's fault. It's Dylan's fault. It's Jared Parker's fault. It's Marcus's fault. It's Tyler's fault. You won't hear that. You won't hear that from him. And I think that's another thing is that to me is going to make it seem, at least I don't think you're going to hear that from him. That's another thing for me that gives me confidence that that this group is going to be better.
Right.
So that's where I'm at for that. Do you have any other questions, like concerns that you have, Ryan, about this team before we jump into the conversation about the sort of the position battles that we see?
Now, I think it's just across the board. I expect the coaching to be better. I know that there's talent on the roster. It's just about health for me, right? Like I think that's a detriment. We mentioned it already. It's like, if there's an injury at tight ends, you're extremely thin there already. If there's an injury at wide receiver, you're extremely thin there. I mean, we didn't even talk about it, but if there's an injury up front to one of the tackles, right, then you're in a weird situation where, like, you hope Tosh can be the guy, maybe coming in, maybe a Caleb Johnson is that guy. I don't know if he will be this year, obviously, but that could set the line back a long way. So I think it's just avoiding injuries right now, man. Like, you feel good about where you are. You feel good about where the depths are coming along, but you don't want to put a guy in a bad situation early on. You don't want to put your roster in a bad situation.
Right. So let's dive into the position battles. And I think right now there's I say 3 with an asterisk because you'll understand why when we get there. Number 1, I do think there is a legitimate position battle at left guard, and it's a little deeper than just Andrew Kristofic and Rocco Spindler. I do think that's a legitimate battle. I think Andrew has continued to develop, but I think Rocco went from early in spring ball to getting better and better and better. His conditioning looked better in the spring game. He still got some work to do there, but his footwork was better. Still work to be done there, but he's a physical kid. And I thought he was one of the better guards in the blue gold game. That's a legitimate battle. And I don't think it's a lock that Josh Lugg is going to be the right guard. If Andrew Kristofic and Rocco Spindler are both better than Josh Lugg, they're going to move one of those guys over to right guard. And Zeke Correll looked great in the spring game, in my opinion. Like, I thought he was excellent. So the question is twofold. If Zeke is clearly one of your best 5, do you put him back out to left guard again where he struggled so much last year? And was it because you got to identify, okay, why did he struggle? Was it because he just can't play there? Or is it he wasn't given the tools to be successful that he has now? And here's the other option. If Zeke Correll is clearly one of your best 5, do you move Jarrett Patterson out to guard? That's the other question.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the scenario that's on the table, Jared Patterson fits guard mold better, right? Like I think there's definitely a combination that coaching was not up to par with Zeke Correll, right? Like he's a guy that at 6'3", 295 pounds, he needs to be technically really good because he doesn't have a lot of length. He's got solid foot quickness, but it's not exceptional foot quickness, right? Like he needs to be in the proper position. He needs to take good angles. He needs to work through contact. He needs to do all those types of things. So there is technical refinement that could happen from better coaching, but he also like he just doesn't have the profile that would usually be successful at guard. Like he has a center body, and there's nothing wrong with that. Jared Patterson, on the other hand, you could play any spot along the offensive line on the college level, any single one. So it makes sense. But then also you get into the next thing, Brian, where it's like, but are you going to move a potential 4-year starter at center in his final year? Like that's
not an easy thing to do, because then you have to take into account, okay, what are we doing to Jarrett Patterson's draft stock? Is it helping or hurting? I mean, it's not the driver of the decision, but you're not doing a proper service to your captain if you don't at least bring it up as part of the conversation, right? And I think you kind of got to give him veto power a little bit. He's earned that. Some other guys haven't. A potential 4-year starter and team captain has earned that right if he so chooses. So it's a very complex thing. So that's why I say, like, the left guard battle's not just Kristofic and Rocco Spindler, and it's not just technically. And you said it before when I brought up, I said left guard, and you were like, your thing was more interior line. You went more broad with it because of the fact that it could impact multiple positions. If Rocco and Kristofic are balling, Josh Lugg is struggling, then it could impact there. If, let's say, one of the tackles goes down, I don't know if Tosh Baker or Caleb Johnson have proven enough yet to be the next guy there, or is it you have to bump Josh Lugg back out there, and now the guard spots open up that way.
Right.
So there's all types of things that factor into it that say, like, look, there's some uncertainty in regards to what exactly the makeup of the 5 is going to be next year, right?
Well, not even the 5, but also the depth piece there that you kind of just illustrated, right? It's like, if there's an injury, what's the next step? Because usually you're going to get your first man off the bench, the 6th best lineman involved. So if it is an offensive tackle going down, if Zeke Corral is your 6th best offensive lineman, are you shuffling 2 different positions? I mean, because obviously you want to just make it'd be awesome if you just had a good backup at every single spot. Like, if there's an injury at right tackle, you have a second best right tackle that goes in, and if he's on a similar level. But we know that that's not how it usually works, right? Like, shuffling happens because there is clearly a first man off the bench. So it's not even just starting 5 needs to solidify itself. You also need to figure out, like, who's the swing guys next up, because that, I think, will determine a lot of moves.
And that's the conversation about Zeke Corral goes there too, Ryan. That's a great point, because, okay, maybe you don't feel comfortable enough with Zeke at guard to start him there. Or you feel like, look, he could play guard, but he's one of our best 5. But we don't think that's true if he moves to guard. But is he your 3rd best guard? Is he your 4th best guard? To where maybe he doesn't start there, but if somebody goes down, you put him there. Michael Carmody's a guy that has to be in that, because once Jared Patterson comes back, Michael Carmody's now your 3rd center. He's too good of a player not to get a shot somewhere, in my opinion. And so what kind of growth does he have? The kind of summer and fall camp that says, hey, don't forget about me, right? And so there's a lot, and some of this, Ryan, is a positive, right? Like, this is like, when we talk about left guard, it's not because Andrew Kristofic did anything wrong. I thought he had a good spring. I thought he played. I mean, he solidified when Zeke struggled at left guard. Andrew came in and solidified it. He wasn't great, but he was steady. And they desperately needed steady last year. So he was really like, I mean, he was like, not just he was coming, you got this gaping hole and there's just water pouring out. And Andrew was just kind of the plug, just did his job, stop the water from pouring out. Right. And so I don't think he did anything this spring to say he has lost the job. I think it's more about a really talented young player is charging. That's where you want to be in this situation. So I want to make sure people understand this. This is a position battle in the sense that you won a position battle where, hey, if Josh Lugg doesn't do this, so-and-so's coming hard and he could push him. Zeke Corral had such a good spring that we got to figure out if this kid's done enough to where we got to figure out a way to get him on the field. So everything we're talking about is a positive, in my opinion, but it doesn't make it not less challenging as a coaching staff. But I want to make sure people understand that when we talk about this position battle, it's an encouraging thing, because I think Rocco has done enough to give the coaches and staff something to think about. I think Zeke did play well enough this spring and in the spring game, but more so in the 14 practices before, to give the coaches something to think about. That's where you want to be, everybody. I mean, that's a great place to be. And that's another reason why I'm really encouraged by the offensive line, because, hey, if this guy doesn't get it done, okay, put the next guy out there and roll. And that's a really good place to be.
No,
Yeah.
it is. I mean, giving yourself options up front, man. You want to have the ability to get your 5 best on the field. So it's where you want to be. It's where you want to be right now. So you have to feel positive about where everything's going, but there's obviously a couple things to figure out. It's not only just the simple fact that you need to figure out your starting 5, which is obviously important, but what's the next plan? What's the backup plan? That's what you are as a coaching staff, right? Like you always have plan B, plan C. What in case this guy goes down? What are we going to do here? It's good to be overly prepared.
So we had a question, a super chat from Randy Hernandez. Randy, thank you very much for that. And he says, on the O-line, how deep is the unit numbers wise? I believe right now, Ryan, they're at 15 scholarship linemen for the fall. They weren't there in the spring because you don't have Ty Chan, Ashton Craig, or Emil Wagner yet, and Billy Schrouth and Joey Tanono were both hurt. So the entire freshman class was not a factor in the spring. They will in the fall, as far as we know. I'm still trying to figure out like just exactly what happened with Joey Tanono. I know he's in a car accident, but as far as the severity of the injuries, I don't know the answer to that. Mm-hmm. We will try and find that out. But they should be pretty good numbers-wise because if Billy Schrouth is healthy, I think he can give you depth as a freshman. I think Ty Chan is big and strong enough, Ryan, to where he can at least be a depth piece as a freshman. Or maybe he's not challenging for playing time, but if you get into a pinch, he can play. Where Emil Wagner and Ashton Craig are probably coming in at like 265, 270, they're going to need more time.
Right.
If Joey Tanono is healthy, and he's a guy that can be a depth piece for you as a freshman. I don't think any of the freshmen are going to be pushing for playing time as early on. And it's not because they're not good. It's just there's a lot of veteran, better player. Like
a lot of stars coming back.
Yeah,
exactly.
So, I mean, and again, talking about the depth, Randy, you've got 8 kids coming back that have started at least 2 games each. So that's a good place to be. That's a good place to be. So, yeah, I like where the depth is at, Ryan. And then Garth Cassidy also had a super chat. He says, what about Carmody going and battling Lug? It's not so much that he would need to move to guard to battle him. It's like, did he show you enough at center to say, hey, we got to give this kid a chance to compete somewhere? And does he do that when you come into the fall? So, yeah, I think – but see, that's the thing is like the line that they put together in the spring was, hey, let's give Michael a chance to see how he handles center. Because you coming in the spring, you didn't have a lot of faith in Zeke Correll because of the way he played last year and his inability to stay healthy. Well, Zeke stayed healthy all spring, and he played great. So now, okay, we've got Ashton Craig and Joey Tanono now, who we view as potential centers. Pat Coogan should be coming back from injury, hopefully. Now you're like, okay, Jarrett Patterson's coming back. So you now have the ability to move Michael Carmody, where you couldn't do that in the spring because you only had one center otherwise. So I think it could happen, Garth, but I think it would be a situation more where he does what he does at his position and Josh struggles. I think it would be more about that than necessarily a situation where you're moving him to push Josh Lugg. I think that is more to it. So I'm going to go the other one, and we kind of talked about this earlier, and that is the other position battle, and this one is not so much as a positive as a concern for me. Like the guard position, like what we just discussed for me is more of a I don't care or know who's going to start at guard, but I'm confident they're going to play well. If Andrew Kostovic's a guard, he's going to be good. I have no doubt because it means he's going to beat out some really good players. If Rocco beats him out, he's going to be really good. If Michael Carmody beats somebody out, he's going to be really good. So I'm confident there. The number 2 tight end is one that's still a question mark for me. And when you look at Mitchell Evans, he does some really nice things athletically. He's there. I think he's got some talent there. I think he competes. He battles. He does all those type of things. But then you get in a situation where you're like, but he's still probably a year away size and strength-wise from where you want him to be in regards to being able to physically handle all of the ins and outs of the number 2 job. So for me with Mitchell Evans, I look at the next – so it'd be like May, June, July. So the next 3 months is a big period for him because he's going to have to really take that jump, in my opinion, physically to say, okay, you're a kid that's got some talent, but we really need you to get to the point where you can be more effective in the run game. You can be stronger, those type of things. If he can make a strength jump this offseason, then I'm confident that Mitchell will have a shot to lock down number 2. Unless Kane Barong comes on from his injury and pushes him. So, and then of course you got the freshman. So to me, Ryan, this is the one position battle, second tight end, where I'm not quite as confident that they're going to like I said, Ryan, before when you had to jump off, like at guard, it's not a concern. It's a battle because so many guys are playing starter caliber ball. It's more of Kristofic starts, he's great. If Rocco beats him out, he's great. I mean, whereas number 2 tight end, it's more of I don't really know who's really emerged and taken hold of that job yet. It's a big period for Mitchell Evans. Kane Barong comes back. There's talent there, but it hasn't quite emerged yet, in my opinion, and established itself.
Well, we've talked a lot, Brian, about the running back unit, right? Like if there's going to be more, I don't want to call it simplicity, but there's going to be more niches or roles. I'm almost curious to see if Kane Barong comes back and he is kind of the movement-based tight end that can give you something in the pass game and he can provide reps. Is there a situation where you don't actually have a number 2 tight end? You have guys that are maybe splitting a ton of time as the second tight end because there is going to be some designs and wrinkles in the offense where you're going to need the second tight end to be more of a pass receiver? Is there going to be some where you have a guy that's going to be more of a blocking tight end? Are you going to be able to use parts of each of their game to a specific role rather than depending on one guy to be that guy? You know what I mean? So that's kind of what I'm curious about, is just to see what is the split as the second tight end. Is there a true guy that takes on the volume as the number 2 tight end in 2 tight end, 3 tight end sets, whatever it would be? Or if they're a team that is just like, we have different skill sets, so we're going to maximize skill sets. We're not going to be as much worried about volume at that second tight end spot.
Yeah. The third position battle is more of a overall positional thing as opposed to left guard, number 2 tight end, and that's receiver. Because honestly, like there was somebody being critical of I did a projected depth chart yesterday, and I had Deion Colsey in the boundary, I had Lorenzo Styles at the field, and Avery Davis in the slot, and it was like, well, Deion Colsey hasn't done anything yet to prove that he should be the number 1. And I'm like, well, first of all, it's a post-spring depth chart. Number 2 is who are you gonna put there? Like who are you gonna put in the boundary the way Notre Dame runs the off? You can put Lorenzo Styles there. He's never played it down there before. You can put Avery Davis there. You can put Braden Lindsey there. Like, who are you going to put there? Right. So I think there's a lot of questions. And that's the question is, okay, your 3 best receivers, somebody's going to have to somewhat play out of position based on what they've shown so far. Now, maybe Lorenzo goes to W and he's great at it, because I don't think you need a Chase Claypool body to be good in the boundary. Look what Alabama had. Their biggest receiver in 2020 when they had an elite pass offense was John Mechie. It's like 6 foot, 205, right? So you don't need it, but you have to adjust how you run your offense, though.
Sure.
Right? You can't run the stuff you run all the time if Lorenzo Styles is your 75% of the snaps guy in the boundary. Now, you can play him there. We both want him to play there, but more so at times in certain looks, not so much he's the W.
Right.
And so that position especially is there, but it's not so much like the W is it, because it's more about, okay, if other guys play well, like how do you move? Is it Michael Mayer out there? Do you do more with him out? I mean, there's so much to it, Ryan, that makes it like I just don't know how the receiving core as a whole is going to shake out. Right. Tobias Merriweather, Jaden Thomas can play all 3 of those positions. And maybe he's the answer there. I don't know. And so that to me is one of the position battles that I'm really interested to see. You had some guys do some good things in the spring, and I got a bold prediction about this position that people are going to probably lose their minds over here in a few. But it's somebody's got to step up, because right now I don't think 3 receivers have established themselves as starters based on what we saw in the spring. Now, when Avery Davis comes back, that answer changes, right? I think that then there are 3 guys that have established themselves as starters. But the problem is those 3 guys kind of fit 2 positions.
Right.
And then you add the fact that there's uncertainty about who the number 2 tight end is. And yeah, those are where the question marks to me. This goes back to the earlier thing about the question mark. So the receiver position battle is one that's going to be very intriguing in the fall camp, in my opinion.
Yeah, because I mean, it really just depends. It's kind of like the offensive line shaking out, right? Like who are your best guys, right? Who are the first three, and can they play together, right? Like, and I think they can. Because let's say it's even like the example, right? Like let's say it's Jaden Thomas, Lorenzo Styles, Brain Lindsay are your three best, right? Like technically speaking, it's not a perfect like slot WX type of conversation, but the fact is that guys have multiple skill sets where I agree with you. Devonta Smith was basically the X in their offense or the W in Notre Dame's offense for Alabama. He is 6 foot, 165 pounds, right? Like you don't need that guy necessarily, but also in the same respect, Devonta Smith was a great player and he won at the rim as well as you can for a guy that size.
And
Like
made a ton of plays as a boundary receiver.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But the thing, to your point though, Ryan, is they didn't play him there snap after snap after snap.
No.
And I broke this down in the SEC title game, and he literally lined up at 5 different receiver spots in the first half.
Mm-hmm.
And what I say 5 is like boundary outside, field outside, boundary number 2, field number 2, and then the third guy in a trips. That's 5 different positions, right? I mean, so it wasn't like you could just – because the problem is if you just put Lorenzo at W, they're going to be able to do things to him because he's not a bigger guy to say, hey, give him problems, right? But if Lorenzo's there one snap and Mayer's there one snap and Deion Colsey's there one snap and Jane Thomas is there one snap and Tobias Merriweather's there one snap and occasionally Braden Lindsey's there because you're going to do something like maybe you're going to run like a backside drive concept where you're going to put him in the boundary and just say, you're climbing to 15 and outrunning this guy, right? So there's things you can schematically do where he doesn't have to win at the line of scrimmage because he's running across. You really have to win at the line vertically. I mean, if you're just running a drive route, you just got to get free of them. Like, just get inside of them, right? And then outrun them. So it's a little different, but it's a wrinkle. It's not an every down thing.
Right.
And that's the difference.
Well, and also, in my opinion, like you need there to be a little bit of depth that steps up at the receiver position because to our point about moving Michael Mayer around, putting him in the slot, putting him in the boundary, I want that to be because you're just so good that you decide you want to do that, right? Like I don't want that to be a necessity. Like I don't want Michael Mayer to have to play into the boundary a ton because your receivers just have not stepped up. Like that is something that's like, wow, that's a luxury to have. You know what I mean? Like that's not a necessity. So you need those guys to step up. You need Lorenzo Styles to be a dude. You need Deion Colsey to take a step forward. You need a couple dudes in this group. Otherwise, you're going to force Michael Mayer into a role that is not something that you necessarily wanted to do, but now something that you needed to do because the depth piece and just the overall schematics of the wide receiver group did not take that step forward.
So, Ryan, those are our position battles. We purposely left off one. I don't think, look, they're not going to name a starting quarterback now. They're not going to name a starting quarterback before fall camp. It wouldn't shock me if they wait to name a starting quarterback till closer to the first game. But it's not a quarterback. There's not a quarterback battle right now. The only battle is Tyler Buckner healthy? That's it. Somebody had asked a question earlier, is he back to working out? He injured his ankle a week ago. The spring is over. They're not in workout mode right now. They just need to let him heal. He's fine. Finals are going to be coming up soon. You don't need to worry about that. Just get healthy, get to treatment, and all that, and he'll be fine. But it's one of those things where it wasn't a debilitating long-term. It's just a sprained ankle. He just had a bad sprained ankle. So let's get to the bold predictions. Unless you feel, Ryan, the need to talk about quarterback being a position battle.
I don't have the need for that. Okay. No, I'm good with that.
Are there any others that you think need to be discussed? Because we both agree tackle is fair. Center's not a position battle other than you have some good players there that maybe you could use to fill other spots. Agree. Number one, tight end's not a battle.
Nope.
Running back's not a position battle per se, unless you are someone who really cares about who's the number one and who's the number two. They're all going to play.
It's a usage battle.
Right.
Yeah,
and there's not the issue of receiver because at receiver, like you have to have a certain skill set to play at a certain spot. At running back, it's not the same problem. They're all going to play.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not worried about that.
Yeah.
So Ryan, Mr. Roberts, let's get into some bold predictions. We both have to make 3.
Uh-huh.
Would you like to start or would you like to defer to me?
Are we going 1-1 or are we going
We'll
all
go
three at
one,
once?
one, one, one,
All right.
one, one.
I'll
Yeah.
start. I think this one's pretty bold. I think it is. We'll see. Tyler Buckner has more rushing touchdowns this year than turnovers.
Okay. I mean,
pretty
I
bold,
think that
right?
has to get, because not my counter, but my first thought to that is the way I think he's going to play. I mean, he's going to have to rush for 10 plus turnovers or 10 plus touchdowns to get there. Because I think
It's
between
possible.
fumbles and interceptions, he may have 10, 11, or 12 of those, right? Just depends on, how it goes. But yeah, that's interesting.
You know where I'm banking? Where I'm banking is, as a former coach, right? You almost have to go, to a large degree, man in the red zone, right? Yep. What is that a victim of? Running quarterbacks. Like that is the big, like when you get your back turned to a guy like a Tyler Buckner, I think that's where he's the biggest threat, right there in the red zone.
And Ryan, I remember in 2017, I mean, the game in which Brandon Wimbush rushed for over 200 yards against Boston College, as big of a threat as he was, they were so afraid of the line and had to commit so many resources to the line. There was that one play against BC where Brandon literally pulls the ball on a read zone and all borderline walks, and I mean, like borderline it being literally walking into the end zone.
Right.
And there will be plays like that. And look, he had 14 that year. And I don't think it's necessarily out of the question that Tyler gets close, because one of my bold predictions is that Notre Dame will score 40 points a game this year. And so they were at 30. They were at 34 in 2017. That's a full touchdown more per game, which means that's an extra 13 touchdowns essentially, assuming you don't have 2 field goals get turned into touchdowns as well, that you're going to have. And I think he could fill that void, because it's the red zone touchdowns, but it's also those goal line touchdowns when teams are overplaying the run. I think it is a big part of it. So
I almost had one very similar to that one. I almost put down they're 5 points better per game, which would have got me at 39. So I was pretty close.
Well, they were at 35 last year.
Were they?
Yeah, they were at 35.1 last year because of the bowl game. No, they were 30. They ended up at 35.2.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, the end of the season. Now, if you want to, now here's the thing we could say: are you talking strictly offense or the team? Because if you're talking strictly offense, because they had 4 non-offensive touchdowns, which is going to add to your points per game.
Yeah, I mean, I was going from an offensive perspective. I didn't really.
So then you're. So they were. Hold on a second. They had 5. They had 5 touchdowns last year, right? They had 2 defensive touchdowns against Georgia Tech, 2 against Cincinnati, or 2 against Wisconsin, and then they had the kick return, right? And then they had a missed extra point, I think, on one of those. So you take 34 off, and then you look at, so they were at 32.6, around 32.6, 33. So 5 points better per game just on offense would get the offense up to 37, 38 points per game, which would be pretty good, because you're always going to have some non-offensive touchdowns. Just about everybody has some. Notre Dame just had a couple more than normal last year.
Yep.
So yeah, I can dig that one. We're similar page on that one. So that's your number 2. I also had a Tyler Buckner prediction for my number 2.
Okay.
My number 2 was that Tyler Buckner next year will have 3,500 yards, 3,500 plus yards, and 35 plus touchdowns, total touchdowns. That could mean 22 passing and 13 rushing, right? That's and again, it's a bold prediction. A bold prediction isn't like Notre Dame's going to run for 200 yards a game. Like, that's not a super bold prediction, right? Like, that's something they've done a lot of. These are meant to be kind of fun and a little bit like, oh, wow, that's a lot. And, so yes, I'm going to go with Tyler Buckner is going to account for at least 3,500 yards total offense, and at least 35 total touchdowns, running and passing. Both of those are running and passing.
I mean, I think people would say the touchdown numbers may be the bold part. Like, I don't think it's bold to say like 2,800 passing, 700 rushing, right? Like, that's reasonable, I think. I don't think that's outlandish.
No, not outlandish. I think the question that I have is there's going to be some games where he's not going to have very many yards. And I look at I look at games like, or potentially, I look at games like Marshall. They have the UNLV, Syracuse. I could see him throwing
Right.
for $120 and rushing for 50, and they're up 35-0 at halftime.
It's fair.
You know what I
It's
mean?
fair.
Like
Yeah.
that's kind of where I come from. And because they do have so much depth at running back, I think there's going to be times where they're just not like completely loaded in
That's fair.
regards to running quarterback run game is what I'm referring to. That's where I was kind of coming from the total number standpoint. But I do believe that the touchdowns is the more bold because I was
Yes.
originally going to go 30 and I was like, that's nothing. That's like 22-8. That's like not hard. So
Yeah.
that's why I went to 35. What is your third bold prediction?
My third one is that there will be 4 players offensively that rush for 500 or more yards. So Tyler
Say that
Buckner,
again.
4 players on offense that run for
Mhm.
500 or more yards.
Okay.
So we have in the prediction, I would say Buckner is 1. I would say Chris Tyree is another. Audric Estime is 1. And then it's either Logan Diggs or, third running back.
Very interesting. I could see that.
Yeah.
I'd say definitely 3.
Yeah.
I think the 4th is what makes that bold.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I mean, let's look at this. Last year they had 1. 2020 they had only 1, but that's because they played only 12 games.
Yep.
And Chris Tyree ran for 496.
So
And
close.
Ian Book went for 485.
So very close. Yep.
They would have got to 500 in 13 games. And they played 1 fewer game. Sebo that year in only 9 games ran for 299. 19-2. Tony Jones and Ian Book. In 2018, it was only 1, Dexter Williams, but they had 4 guys go for at least 250.
Right.
Which I thought was interesting. And here's the thing, only 1 running back that year played a full season. Dex only had 9 games. Jafar played 10, and then Ian Book was one of them too. He missed a game as well. 2017, they had 2. But they also had Deion McIntosh had 368 in 8 games, and Dex had 360 in 10 games. Then they had 2 other guys that had over 200 yards. So if you consolidate the 4th and 5th guys that had 200 plus, then you could get closer to that number. So, yeah, you had 1 in 2016. You had 3 in 2015. So that was the last time that was the closest they came, right? You had 3. So you had CJ Prosise, Josh Adams, and Deshaun Kaiser.
Yep.
14, you had 1. 13, you had 2. And then Torian had 470. So you got close that year. But then the next after that was 204. 2012, they had 2. 2011, they had 2. 2010, they had 2. So, yeah, that's bold. I mean, it's something a bold prediction is something you haven't seen before.
Right.
So you're like, 2 guys are going to get 500 plus yards. You're like, okay, dude, they do that every year. That's not real bold. So, yeah, I like that. I know I like that because it's something we haven't seen in the last 12 years. And there's been some years where you've had running quarterbacks because you don't do that if you don't have running quarterback. Your quarterback's not one of those guys, right? And so Notre Dame's is other than Tommy Rees, every quarterback they've had since is a running threat. They varied by degrees, but well, let me rephrase that. Between Tommy Rees and Jack Cohn, right? Every quarterback.
Hey, Jack Cohn had a 20-yard touchdown last year. I don't know what you're talking about.
But Tyler Buckner still went for 336 last year as the backup.
Yep.
So he may have done more if he didn't get hurt. They only did that in 10 games. So yeah, I like that. My third bold prediction is that, and it's not so much a statistical one, but more of a breakout one. Deion Colzie is going to end up being one of their 3 best receivers next year. And I'm talking 3, let me rephrase it, 3 best pass catchers next year. That includes a tight end.
Love it.
I was really skeptical of that during the spring. But there was a couple things I saw from Deion in the spring game that made me say, what was it we said about Deion? Like, he needed some success to prove to him, hey, man, you can be good. And I think they're challenging him. Like, that's something that's important. The staff believes he can be a difference maker. I'm confident in that. And after this, Sean told me this because Sean was sitting really close, so we got him really nice tickets for the blue gold game. He was originally going to be up in the press box, but we hooked him up for his birthday because his birthday was on the blue gold game. And so he actually heard this happen directly. And I don't know if this was on the TV copy or not, but he said after like kind of late after Dion missed that early catch, like Marcus Freeman like ran over to him, was like, "You got to catch that," this, that, and the other. And that kind of backs up what I've been told by other people, that they're really pushing Dion because they think he can be a dude. Like they see him with a lot of talent. It's just he's got to buy into it. He's got to understand that next level of, hey, yeah, I can be great, but I got to do this to get there. Whereas in the past, I could just do this to get there. And I think that's where he's at. But I think the fact that he did get open for what could have been a couple touchdowns, I think there's a lot of film that Chancey Stuckey can point to and say, hey, man, if you can give me that every snap, you can be a dude here. And I think Dion needed that. And I think he's going to have a strong summer, and I think he's going to be a guy because here's the reality of it. There's things Deion Colzie can do on the football field that nobody else on the roster right now can do at receiver. The only other dude on the roster that can do it is Michael Mayer, just because of his size, right? And so they're going to give him more chances than maybe some other guys would get. And I think that's where I come from on that, Ryan. So what is your response to that?
I think if Notre Dame's passing offense or just offense in general is at its best, it's because Deion Colzie took a big step. Because like you said, there are unteachables there that you just can't coach. Like you can coach the releases, you can coach the ability to stack, you can teach even the ability to win at the catch point with proper technique and in positioning. You can do all that stuff, but you can't teach 6'5". You can't teach the fact that he can run, and he brings a different element that is not present in the offense right now. I love Lorenzo Styles. Lorenzo Styles is 6'1", and he's a guy that I envision more manipulating space and getting open that way, right? Mm-hmm. Like he's not a 6'5", going to bully you at the catch point, work down the vertically in the same way that Deion Colzie is going to do. So that element is not present on the roster. So the optimist in me says, if Notre Dame's going to be at its best, it's because Deion Colzie stepped up, and he's a player that we think he can be with that talent level.
Yeah, and I'll say this: if he doesn't step up, my next bold prediction is by the end of the year, Tobias Merriweather's pushing for freshman All-American honors.
Woo!
If he doesn't step up, Tobias will beat him out. I mean, just if Deion, and I think that I honestly here's something that goes into this too for me, Ryan. Mm-hmm. I think Tobias showing up this summer is going to be the final thing for Deion to sink or swim, and I think he's going to swim. Because like right now, like when Tobias shows up, like that's the only dude on the depth chart that Deion can like look in the face, right? Like everybody else kind of looks down on, right? Like because they're a lot smaller than he is. And I think when Tobias starts going out there and practicing, like balling out a little bit, I think that's going to be like okay, Deion, like for the first time in your life, you're not the most physically gifted on the guy on the roster. You know what I mean? Like last year he wasn't because you had Kevin Austin, but it was different. He was a freshman. It's like, you got to bring it, buddy. And I think he's going to answer that challenge. I do. I don't have like specific reasons to believe this. It's just a gut. It's just my bold prediction. And I think that when Tobias shows up and he starts playing, if Deion doesn't respond well to that, that's the competition Marcus Freeman says he wants and loves, right? If Deion doesn't respond well to that, Tobias will beat him out, and Tobias will be a playmaker for Notre Dame. I think Tobias is going to play no matter what. Mm-hmm. I think if Deion steps up and balls out, then Tobias can give him some time there, but he can also play X. He can play Z. He's a 6'4" guy that can play all over because of his skill set. So it's not like Deion or Tobias. It could be both. And I think we'll see some 12 personnel if they both step up at times where you got those two big guys in the field. But if Deion doesn't step up, Tobias will beat him out, and he'll be the W. And he'll have 40+ catches and be, pushing for potential freshman All-American honors. But I think Deion's going to respond well to that. And I think the light's going to go on for Deion a year before it did Miles Boykin. I do.
Love to hear it.
Yeah. So again, it's a prediction. I'm not setting y'all up with, I was told this by this source and I haven't, but I'm just predicting that the light's going to go on for him. So Ryan, before we get out of here, we got a ton of questions. So let's get to these. We also had some super chats, some really good questions here. I want to get to these as well. Garth Cassidy said, Brian, thank you for that, Garth. Sent you in the mods a message on the board about depth chart a couple days ago before you put yours out. I'm curious if you saw it or not. I don't think I did, Garth, but I'll go look for it when we get off here. Zach Martin with a super chat. Thank you, Zach. He says, if you could only have one bow in this cycle, you're not going to like my answer, Zach. If you could only have one bow in the cycle, would it be Drake or Peyton? All factors like recruiting other prospects, need, skill, etc., all count. Go ahead, Ryan. I'll let you answer it first.
So my immediate reaction was Peyton because of the depth chart at safety maybe moving forward, right? But my actual answer is Drake Bowen because he's the recruiter of the group, man. And he's a really good player. Like, he's a top 50 kid. And he is the guy that's out there right now saying, like, this needs to be the best class ever. People had concerns about Keon Keeley. Keon, come up to South Bend. Right. I'm hanging out with you all day. And we heard it and
he's a top 50 recruit, which matters
more.
Yeah,
it's not like he's just a throw. Yeah, it's not like he's a token Indiana prospect, right? No, this dude's a legit top 50 player, and he's also like on campus leading the charge to like, oh, uncommitted guy, come over here, man. Let's play together, right? So like that's why he's my answer.
My answer is I don't have to answer that. Like that, but see, here's the thing, like Zach, like. Here, Sean and I were talking about this earlier on the phone. Notre Dame fans we have to condition ourselves to accept the fact and embrace the fact that Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden and Tommy Reese and Al Washington and the whole staff. Notre Dame is now playing big boy football. Okay, when it comes to the recruiting trail, Notre Dame is playing big boy football. And we don't have to get into these anymore of, well, what if you can only have one? Because that's not what big boys do, right? And I love the premise behind your question. And if I had to answer it, my answer would have been the same as Ryan's. I think Peyton Bowen has a chance to be an elite player. But if it's just Peyton and Drake, it's like Peyton impacts Peyton coming to Notre Dame. Drake, I think, impacts others. But I don't have to pick that because, number one, they're both committed to Notre Dame. And the other part is for Notre Dame to get to that next level, they need to start getting both of those types of guys. And that's why I'm going to cheat a little bit and take that answer. It's also why I let Ryan go first, because I knew Ryan was going to give you he was actually going to answer your question and give you a good, rational answer. But for me, it's like both. I'm not accepting the premise because Notre Dame doesn't have to play that game anymore. And it's kind of funny watching some Notre Dame fans go through this mental process of trying to believe it's different, but not ready to go there just yet. Like, it's like and I fall victim to this, still waiting on that shoe to drop, right? Like, okay, there's been way too much success going on here lately. I'm waiting on something bad to happen. You know what I mean? Like, and that's just what we've been conditioned to believe and accept for 30 years. But things are changed now. And it's like when Keon Keeley started taking visits, Ryan, you remember what the reaction was? Well, there goes that, not going to get Keon because he's going to Alabama. Notre Dame can't beat Alabama for that guy. He's going to Florida, and what did we say? Yeah, just let it play out. We feel good. And now it's like Keon's like, look, it's now been how many months since he's been taking visits, and he's still, not only is he solid to Notre Dame, he's recruiting other players to come join him at Notre Dame.
Yep.
And so it's just a different era. And we were talking about on the message board. If you're on the message board, you know this, and I'll say it here, but like, go look at a Michigan, a Texas, a Clemson, Ohio State even Ohio State fans who think Notre Dame is just basically, it's like Youngstown State and Notre Dame are similar programs. Like, that's how Ohio State fans view Notre Dame. It's been like that my whole life. They're even getting a little bit nervous. Because it's like, wait a minute, like, they're beating us for this guy and they beat us for that guy. And like, hold on a second. Like, but Michigan fans, somebody sent me a thing today. Like, Michigan fans are at the point now where they're like, they need to hire Tommy Reese. Like, a buddy of mine sent me that today. Like, they need to hire Tommy Reese because they can't beat him. So they just need to then go get him. Like, when was the last time we had that conversation about a Notre Dame coach?
That's crazy.
And like, I was on a Clemson board today and I saw like 7 or 8 comments because I was having some fun. I mean, like, I'm hearing about these freakouts. I'm like, let me go check these out. And they're like, when Dabo leaves, they need to go hire Marcus Freeman. Like, that is the ultimate compliment, right? Like, because it's like, we can't beat this guy. So when this guy leaves, we need to go get that guy. But that's what big boy football is like, everybody. And we need to understand the fact that Notre Dame's playing big boy football now.
Mhm.
And where Zach and I love the question. It's a fun question. But it's like, we don't have to ask those questions anymore. The expectation now needs to be both. Who would who would you rather have, this guy or this guy? Yeah, I'm gonna take them both, because Alabama doesn't have to pick between those two, right? Georgia doesn't pick between those two. It's time Notre Dame starts being like that, and so that's why I'm gonna cheat a little bit.
Don't worry, Zach. Yeah. Zach, I gave you your answer. Don't worry, you got an answer.
I let you go first. Irish Gordian knot. This is going to be the most frustrating offseason in a long time. So many, I wanted to ask Zach's first because I knew what my answer was going to be, and it's going to tie into this one. So many great recruits visiting other schools and having to wait for the Ohio State game. Ryan, that ties exactly into what I just said, which is there's a panic with Notre Dame fans because, we want this guy, but he's going here and he's going there and he's going there. Yeah, I get that, because for the last 30 years, those guys have more often than not ended up going to the other schools.
Fair.
This is a different era. Those schools are now worried about Notre Dame the way that Notre Dame has been worried about those other schools for years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, the couple of spots that we told you to just chill out and let it play out was the biggest one outside of the Dante Moore questions that we get constantly is Keon Keeley. And Brian just mentioned it, right? And we're telling you, he fits Notre Dame, right? And apparently he's shut everything down because we didn't panic.
We believe that to be the case as of
correct.
Right now, right?
Yeah, as of right now. Sure. But, the fact that he has been on campus now a couple times in the last month and he's seemingly to recruit everybody now is a great sign that Keon Keeley is about as firm as you can be to a program. So the point of that matter is we have said multiple times, both of us, that if you're going to recruit at that level, you also have to be a little ready to keep them in the class, right? Like, you got Keon Keeley a long time ago now, who is a 5-star top 10 caliber player. And it's like the programs aren't just going to go away.
Right.
We talked about the other day.
Right. They're not going to stop recruiting him no matter what he says.
And people can say I'm not taking phone calls. I'm not taking visits. If Nick Saban called you, you're answering the phone. Let's be honest.
Here's the thing. If I'm advising a kid, I'm like, don't burn that bridge. Because what if something happens at Notre Dame? I mean, with the way that coaching turnover is now, you're foolish to completely shut off all those lines of communication. Right. Like, you just never, and I'm not predicting something's going to happen, but I'm just, in general, that needs to be the case. But like you said, if Nick Saban calls,
you're answering the phone.
Yeah. Right? If Nick Saban called me, I'd answer the phone.
Heck
right.
Yeah.
And so, but the other part of it too, Ryan, is when you recruit big boys that are uncommitted, they're going to visit other schools. And the thing is, Notre Dame has gotten so many kids over the years that were all Notre Dame. But the reality is, a lot of those kids were not this type of kid that you need to take that next step. And so you have to think about some of the best players on the team now, right? Some of them, they got super early. A lot of them are like quarterbacks, or local kids. Blake Fisher, Tyler Buckner's a quarterback. But some of the other game changers that they had, they were guys that kind of went down for a while, right? Like, you look at Isaiah Foskey. He went through his whole senior year uncommitted. They had to win that one late. That's what it's just going to be like. The fact that they have this many studs this early is impressive enough. But people are going to keep recruiting. Like, that's just the reality of it. But so I don't look at that as a frustrating. I think it's exciting, because Notre Dame is in the battle for kids that just 2 years ago we never would have dreamed that they would be they'd be like the fifth one, and they'd visit. We'd all know he's not coming to Notre Dame, really. He just, whatever. But the fact that Clemson fans are panicking a little bit, Michigan fans are losing it. They're like scared, like, oh my God, they're going to get Dante Moore and CJ Carr. Like, they're losing and I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But they're losing their minds, and I'm here for it. Right. But it's a different era, and we have to reprogram our minds to embrace it and say, this is going to be a fun off season. Because do you know how many big time Caleb Downs is coming back to Notre Dame, y'all, in June? Y'all get that, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we have to embrace it. And to me, so it's not going to be a frustrating. It's going to be a long off season because of an excitement of I can't wait for the Ohio State game.
Right.
But this is going to be a fun off season because Notre Dame is doing things now that they just haven't done in a very, very long time.
Yep. I mean, it's exciting, man. Because I mean, I feel like when I used to follow recruiting, just as a fan, you're obviously very optimistic. It's like, wow, you got this player, you got that player. But there was always a thing in the back of my mind that was also like, you're going against Alabama, you're probably going to lose, right?
Mhm.
You're going to go against Ohio State for an Ohio kid, you're probably going to lose. Like that was just always in your mind, right? Because Ohio State for a while there was the main recruiting power in the Midwest. Like it just was, right? So it's different now. It's different. And I've said this multiple times, this staff is not afraid of competition. They're not.
Mhm.
Why do you account for the fact that Notre Dame already has 2 Texas kids, highly ranked Texas kids, top 100 Texas kids
That Texas wanted.
that are, again, top 100 recruits already committed to Notre Dame, and they just put themselves in great position for another top 100 Texas recruit. The fact that you're going into the state of Texas,
Top 100.
3 top 100 players, right? It tells you that Notre Dame is not afraid. They have Keon Keeley, who is the top 10 player out of the state of Florida, defensive end. Letting him get out of the South is a huge loss for the Southeastern Conference, for the Alabamas, for the Georgias, for the Floridas, whoever it would be. So I think that just, again, shows you this staff is just a little different, man.
Yeah.
Like they're a little different.
And
I
it's
know
not just Marcus Freeman. That's the thing. He hired a
Right.
bunch of dudes that
Right.
he expects to put in the same kind of work he did, and he hired guys with a track record of building relationships and or being great recruiters. And I say and or because you don't hire Chancey Stuckey because he has a track record as a great recruiter, because he doesn't. He hasn't coached that long.
Right.
But you see the personality, the work ethic, and those things that make you think he can be that because he's about building relationships. We told you at the time, it wasn't an accident or a coincidence that every guy that Marcus Freeman got was someone who had a reputation of being someone who's good at building relationships, honest, trustworthy relationships with these kids. It was not an accident.
Right.
Because Marcus Freeman was a big-time recruit coming out of high school. He was an Army All-American. He was a 4-star recruit that was coveted all over the country. He knows that game, and he knows what works. And, you know, it's like you said, Ryan, this staff is different. And the rest of college football sees it, which is why they're getting so much negative recruiting against Notre Dame going on right now. Like, there's a lot of it going on right now.
And forget about the shopping down a different aisle thing that we like to poke fun at, obviously. I think it's even more from a fundamental perspective, Brian. You know, as a former coach, what is like one of the main things that coaches always preach? Competition, right? Like, let's compete. If you're afraid to compete in recruiting as a staff, how can you preach that to your players that they need to compete in everything they do? You literally sat on the side and said, nope, I can't get that kid for a few years. Like, that's what you did.
Yeah.
That's what you did. You did not identify properly and fight the battles because you didn't think you had a shot.
Right.
This staff is making it a little different. And I know I said a little, and someone said, it's not a little different.
It's a lot.
It's a lot different.
Yeah.
Sure.
But the thing is it wasn't just that they didn't think they could get him. They had a head coach who didn't want to put in the work to get him, if we're going to be honest. And some of those coaches, like Mike Elston, I think is an example of. But there have been others that said, well, I can't get that guy by myself, so I'm going to work on this kid I can get because I know I'm not getting help from over here. I mean, and there's a reason that they had so much success in the 1 year that Mike Elko was here, because you had a great a great recruiter, defensive coordinator. And there's a reason that immediately upon Marcus Freeman getting hired, the recruiting got better because they could always do it. It's like, I made this like kind of joke on the message board, Ryan, and it went off a lot better than I thought it was. I just kind of made it as a joke. I said, but you know, like, we're going to look back on this and we're going to look at like Brian Kelly, kind of like Admiral Yamamoto from, you know, the Japanese Navy. You know, the quote that's attributed to him is after Pearl Harbor, which was for the most part, a huge success, with the exception of the fact they thought the carriers were going to be there and they weren't. But they crippled the Pacific Fleet for the most part. And he's quoted as saying after the fact, he goes, I feel like all we've done is awaken a sleeping giant. Because he had been in America. He knew that, yeah, America may seem this way and everything's great and all this, but you don't want to piss them off because they can mobilize a force domestically and militarily that you can't compete with, right? So that's my history lesson for today. But he's attributed that quote, and I kind of feel like that's what Brian Kelly has done. By him leaving, it's opened up a pathway for Notre Dame, for the sleeping giant that I've always felt Notre Dame was, to be woken up. And we're seeing it. Now, they got to go out and keep winning, right? Because they go 7-5 this year, and all of a sudden commits are like, yeah, you're a cool dude, but I want to win a championship. We don't think that's going to happen, first of all. But that's the thing that and you hear it. Like, there's an energy that comes from these kids when they leave campus, Ryan. You do it. I mean, you see it firsthand. It's like Sullivan Absher. I don't care what anybody says. Sullivan Absher was not trending to Notre Dame when he showed up last Thursday.
Absolutely
he wasn't.
not.
Or Friday.
Not.
He wasn't. Yep. And it changed to where coming out of the visit, it's basically like Clemson fans are like, ball game. It's over. I mean, you know, and Clemson mods are like that now. Like, they tried, but it's over. Like, think about that. And we're seeing that with like Jaden Greathouse came in with everybody's like, he likes Notre Dame. And I didn't think that Texas was the leader to the degree that a lot of people thought, where it was a matter of time. I mean, you don't schedule 2 visits to Notre Dame without having ever been there if there's not a legitimate interest. But then coming out of the visit, it's like, yeah, they're going to be hard to beat now. Rodney Gallagher's a guy like didn't know a lot about Notre Dame. We weren't sure where. Now it's like, okay, now Notre Dame's the team to beat. Like, this happens over and over and over and over, and they're not going to get everybody. But man, it's impressive. And like the thing with Keon too, we always try to tell people is people say, well, it's about actions, not words. I'm like, yeah, but the only action isn't where a kid goes when he visits. There's other actions that Keon took that entire time. He was always engaged with the fellow commits. Always. He was always engaged with the Notre Dame coaches. He was honest and upfront with the Notre Dame coaches. He was always doing things that you expect of a kid who's firm to do, other than the fact to take visits. But if you understand why Keon took visits, you'd understand this is actually a good thing. Because if he didn't take him now, he was eventually going to take him in the fall. And he needed to experience those things. He should have experienced those things. And I'm glad he did, because he's more sold on Notre Dame now because he went to Bama. Because this is the program. This is the program in college football. And I feel like I can go there and be just as good, if not better. That's a good thing. Whereas if he hadn't visited, it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe I should give Alabama another look. And you don't want that. So I'm all for it, Ryan. I'm all for it. Let's get to some more here. That was a great question. Sparked a lot of discussion, but it's an exciting offseason, my man.
Oh yeah, we spent a lot of time on that question. I didn't realize. Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah. Bobby Halfacre, with better O-line play, running backs are more productive, which in return the wide receivers get more touches. Agree or disagree? I agree.
Yeah,
because of the RPO game, like that. Sure. I mean, 100% agree. If the running game is legit, because of the line and the backs, you're going to complete 8 to 10 RPOs a game. I mean, there's no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's no doubt.
And it's easier touches too off the RPO action, right? Like, I mean, just like arrow routes, slants, like it's bubble screens, like it's easy stuff, too. So,
yep. Utah Irish. Here's one for you, Ryan, because I'm not going to know. I never watched him at Arizona. I don't know if you did or didn't. I don't know.
Yeah.
Utah Irish asks for a mailbag question if there's time, and you can even I can't answer this one, so hopefully you can. For a mailbag question, if there's time, we're making time. Can you guys compare Michael Mayer to Rob Gronkowski at this stage in their career? Thanks so much.
Yeah, I mean, so the backstory with Gronk is that Gronk actually came out as a junior, but he was hurt his whole junior season, so he didn't play his junior year. So his sophomore year was his big year, right? I would say that comparatively, Gronk was used a lot more as a vertical seam runner while he was at Arizona than Michael Mayer does. Michael Mayer is much more further along as a route runner. Like, he has shown that he has ability to kind of get uncovered in certain situations while running different types of routes. Rob Gronkowski was just a big, long athlete at Arizona. Like you could see it. It's like, darn, dude, that dude's 6'6", 245, 250 his sophomore season. You're like, you can put on another 15, 20 pounds easy, right? Which he ended up doing. So I think that I would say Mayer is further along as a true sophomore. What really happened great with Gronk is Gronk was a good prospect. Obviously, he went in the second round despite not playing the year before, but coming to New England was like the perfect fit for him, man. Because his first year, he had like 50 catches for like 500 something yards. It wasn't like overly impressive, but he had like 11 touchdowns or something like that. He was used in a very specific role as a, kind of a red zone threat type of thing in Tom Brady. And he had the time to develop. So I think as prospects, though, if you're just looking at them just as sophomores, Michael Mayer's more advanced. Rob Gronkowski was more upside, obviously, from a longer type of athlete perspective. But I would say as long as Michael Mayer's trajectory continues, the kid has a chance to go top 10, top 15 next year because he is that special of a player.
I never liked, you tell me if you agree or disagree. Well, first, let me back up your point. Again, this isn't from analysis standpoint because I didn't watch him at Arizona. But as a freshman, Gronk had 28 catches for 525 yards, 18.8 per carry. That fits into what you talk about, the vertical aspect. And even in year 2, he had 47 catches for 672 yards. That was 14.3 and 10 touchdowns. Michael Mayer in his first 2 years has averaged 10.7 and 11.8 yards per catch. Now, I think that needs to jump, and that's more of a usage problem than him not being a guy that can do that. But to your point, those numbers do kind of back up what Ryan just said in regards to the comparison. I'm going to say this, Ryan, and you tell me if you agree or disagree. I've never liked the baby Gronk comparisons. I feel like those are simply just because he's a tight end and he's tall and he's white and
he wears 87.
Right.
Yep.
Like their games are not similar to me. Like Gronk was basically like a big receiver. I always felt like he was more like a big receiver in New England. And what I do remember of him at Arizona, he was more of a big receiver. He was more Devin Funchess than he was Michael Mayer at Arizona, from what I do remember of him.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that comparison fits because I just don't think their games are very similar, in my opinion.
Well, I think they have different body types. The one thing about Gronk is at Arizona, he wasn't really used in line a ton, but when he got to New England after he developed, he became one of the better blockers in the NFL, right? So like the upside was there. I will say Michael Mayer is further along as a blocker though in college just because he does it a lot more, right?
That's where that Devin Funchess comparison, like in college, Devin Funchess was basically a receiver. Mm-hmm. Maybe Kyle Pitts is a better comparison in regards to how they were lined up and used, even though they were different athletes. That might even be a better comparison, but he wasn't a tight end. He wasn't a tight end per se in college, in my opinion.
And Michael Mayer is way more like physically advanced because Gronk's taller. But I mean, Michael Mayer, since he was a freshman, man, he had that body where you're just like, well, that guy's going to play in the NFL. Like there's no doubt about it. I mean, he is a well put together dude. Gronk was more long levers and needed to fill out going into New England. Then Michael Mayer is going to come out of college and you're going to be like, yep, he's physically ready. Like he can play in line and do all those types of things. I don't have a great comp for Mayer. Like I got some Greg Olsen vibes, I thought Greg Olsen was kind of a similar stylistic player, like body type was similar as well. I definitely don't think that the games match up to Gronk. I understand why. It's because he's big and he's ferocious and he's going to run you over. And like, I understand why it's a comp, but I mean, I just think he's a much looser athlete than Gronk. Gronk, again, the thing that Gronk did so well is he was a great blocker, obviously, huge catch radius, but when he worked the seams, man, he was, I mean, no linebacker could run with him as a seam runner. Like, I mean, it was just insane. His yards per catch. The 1 year,
and if you could run with him, Ryan, he's so freaking long that Tom Brady would just throw it like 8 feet over your head, and he would just go up and get it.
Yeah,
it's absurd.
Yep. He's Rob Gronkowski's special, man. When he was in his prime. I mean, last year he quietly had like 800 something yards. It's like, I mean, he's just a really good player, man. Really
he just hangs out at the beach all summer. I think I'm gonna go to the NFL camp now.
Remember when he lost all that weight and then Tom Brady went to Tampa and he's like, oh, I'll come play, I guess. Sure.
I love that commercial that they have, the phone commercial where Tom Brady's talking to Gronk about maybe what he's going to Tampa Bay, and Gronk's telling him to retire and all that. But because it broke up, it was like, come out and I'm coming with you or whatever. And so and he's like, Mom, where's my football pants? Because the funny thing is, like, I could see that being kind of somewhat true. You know what I mean? Like, this is from a personality standpoint. 99 problems, but BK ain't one. What at minimum realistic and max what are minimum realistic and max expectations for this offense in 2022? Also, in terms of an offensive team comp, what would a good comp for this offensive expected performance? So let's start minimum. I think the minimum expectation is that they're slightly better than they were last year.
Yeah. And
That's
I would
minimum expectation.
And I would say, like, I mean, so like I think of that as like the worst case scenario. So I think the worst case scenario is that they are a good running team, but they don't take the steps in the passing game, so they're a little one dimensional, right? Like that's kind of what I think is like the worst case scenario. Best case scenario is that you're a balanced team that has the opportunity to do both. And then the max for me is that you're really good at both, right? Like that's where the explosiveness and the efficiency come into effect.
And that's where you could see them getting up to 43, 44 points per game as far as the max expectations. And because that's going to include, like, you're going to have some games, you're not only going to put up 60 on like Marshall and UNLV, but you're going to put up like 50 on Cal and Stanford and teams like that, which is what we saw from them at the end. I mean, Notre Dame averaged over 40 points per game the last 6 games of the year last year, right? Without any ability to run the football legitimately. I mean, so the potential's there. I don't think that's realistic, though. I think realistic is more in that 38 to 39. Like, my bold prediction was 40. That the bold prediction isn't a realistic, it's a bold. It's things go well. So, like, to me, like 37, 38, like, is kind of realistic. And the reason it's there because they don't have a 1AA team to hang a 69 spot on, right? And they do play some really good teams. So I think 37, 38 for the offense. Again, we're not talking about like 5, 6 non-offensive touchdowns to get you to 35. We're talking about like legit 37, 38, which was Ryan's thing at 5+ over what the offense did last year. I think that's the realistic expectation because you are going to be a much better running team, right? You are expected to have more balance in the passing game. And I think the schedule sets up to where there's some challenging games on there. But there's also some games where some of the teams that are the best teams that are going to play, Ohio State, if we're to say the 4 best opponents, would you agree with me as of right now? The 4 best opponents are going to be Ohio State, Clemson, USC, and BYU based off preseason expectations.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, it could change. It could be Carolina, it could be BC, but that's the expectation now.
Sure.
2 of those teams suck on defense. So the point is like you may lose, but you're not going to lose and score 10 points, or at least you shouldn't, or there's major problems. You're going to lose, you're going to score points. It's not like when they played Georgia in 2017 or 2019 and you lost and you only scored 17 or 19 points. It's not. I don't think it's going to be like that. I think if they're going to lose this year, it's going to be a lot like Ohio State last year. I'm not saying they're going to be as dynamic as Ohio State was. I mean, like, you're not going to score 13 points and lose. You're going to score 24, 27 and lose, and your defense doesn't make enough stops or whatever the case may be. So I think that's more of a realistic expectation, is that 37 to 38 range, 450 plus, closer to 475 in yards. Getting up to that 6.5 yards per play, those are realistic expectations. That's where they should be this year. If they can get up to 7, which I think is possible, then you start seeing those other things happen. Because I could see this offense, because they were well over 7 the last 6 games of the year last year. And I think they're going to be a lot better this year, in my opinion. Tom Ryan with a good question here. Ryan, what influences a potential quarterback? I'll say more. A great offensive line to protect him, or great receivers to throw to?
I mean, from a recruiting aspect, I would say the receivers probably affect the quarterback more than the offensive line. Now, I don't think that practically is how it necessarily should be. I feel like most smart quarterbacks are going to understand that they need both. Like, they don't just need one. But from a general feeling, I would say that it's probably receivers that sway quarterbacks most.
I'm going to ask you a second question, and I'm going to take his question and kind of mold it a little bit. What has a greater influence on a quarterback's performance once he gets there? Because I took it to be a recruiting question like you did with a potential quarterback.
Right.
But let's say once he gets here, what has the greater influence on his performance? A great offensive line to protect him, or great receivers to throw to?
I would say offensive line, right? Like I think most quarterbacks, if you generally give them a good amount of time,
It's really
then
hoping we could disagree on that one.
oh, did you agree on it? Did you
No,
agree?
yeah, I thought you were going to say receivers, and we were going to have a debate, and
No.
we freaking
I mean,
agreed.
man, if a guy's on his back, it doesn't matter how good your receivers are, man.
It
Like you
goes
need
back to the original question, Ryan.
yeah.
You can scheme receivers to some level of success.
Exactly. I mean, like Tom Brady in his peak with New England, right? His receivers, for the most part, I know you have Randy Moss for a couple years, but like for the general part of his career, he has made wide receivers look better because he just had a million seconds to throw the ball, man. Like he got the ball out quick near the end of his career, but like if you look at some of those offensive lines he had with like Matt Light and Logan Mankins and like those types of teams, if you give your quarterback time and you don't have him, rushing things and rushing his process as much, guys get open eventually, right? Like guys can get open.
Yep. Good question, Tom. Mark Applegate. I would like to see the offense be more aggressive and more energy throughout the entire game. Hopefully the play calling is a lot like it was the last 6 weeks and the bowl game. I agree with that, Mark. I think the one takeaway, the reason I wanted to ask this question, I think the aggressiveness will be there. I think we saw that. I think it's Tommy Rees's nature to be a bit aggressive. We saw that in 2020. That's the one thing Tommy Rees was in some of those big games that year. He was against Clemson, he was taking shots early in the game. With the game on the line, fourth quarter against Clemson, you need a touchdown to win. He took a shot. That's not what Brian Kelly normally does. And so I think that the aggressiveness part, I'm not concerned about. And I think that people need to understand aggressive doesn't equal tempo. Aggressive is a play calling. It's a mentality thing. The one thing I do want to see that I really liked about Mark's comment is I do think Notre Dame's offense needs to play with a little bit more energy. Just a little bit, maybe, I don't know if it's swagger, toughness, I don't know what it is, but there's just something missing where they don't a defense should always be a little bit more energy. Just it's the nature of being a defensive player to an offensive player.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean you can't have more energy, and that's something I do want to see. Like maybe you're a little too methodical mentally. I want to see them play with a little bit more fire. And I think that's that final step for me for Coach Rees. So really good comments, Mark.
Yeah.
Tyler Bedwell, it seems like there's a chance Jaden Mickey could start as a freshman. Is that your guys' read as well?
I don't think start. I think play, sure. But I think he's got, I mean, you have Clarence Lewis who's played a ton of football. You have Ryan Barnes, who I thought had a good spring from everything I heard, right? And you're going to have Cam Hart coming back. So I think he's going to play. Starts maybe by the end of the season. We'll see. But like, I don't know.
I would agree with his comment that there's a chance. I think there's a chance. I'm just not predicting it. So that's where I'm with you, Ryan. I'm not predicting it's going to happen, but there's a chance. I mean, if he comes out, he'll get a chance. If he comes out and outplays guys every day, he's gonna get a chance to start for him. It's just I don't. To your point, I think that there's some good players there that it's going to make it harder for him to start unless you chalk it up to nickel and count that as the starting position. That I could see, but that's not. I don't think that's within that. I don't think that's where the question was coming from. So I would say there's a chance, but I'm not predicting it. So I think we're on the same page, Ryan. I would, if he were to say, "Hey, do you think Jaden Mickey will start?" No, I don't.
Right.
Do you think there's a chance? Yeah, there's a chance.
Sure.
Toe Jam, 1992. B. Ryan. The dig on Spindler, Rocco Spindler this spring was slow footwork. Has that improved? He looked fast on screen plays in the blue gold game, but running speed and footwork speed are not the same. Mm-hmm. I thought he looked, we talked about this during the show, Ryan. I thought he looked improved. I definitely thought his footwork, his foot quickness, well, not foot quickness, his footwork looked more sped up. I think his conditioning looked better when we saw him on April 23rd compare when we saw him in early March. Agree or disagree?
No, I think in the open practice, for the most part, offensive linemen in general, right? If you don't notice them, that's usually a very good thing. You noticed him for bad reasons in this spring practice, right? Like it was like he can't stay attached to guys because he's just like his foot quickness is not good enough to kind of attack the angle properly, get proper leverage, that type of thing. I didn't go back and I didn't watch him specifically, but I also didn't notice him. So that tells me, good. That's a good step. If I don't notice you as an offensive lineman, that's usually a very good thing.
Let's go to the next question. Sean Kane, this is a comment, and I had to bring it up. He put it on twice, Sean, I'm getting this from a lot of fans. You are not alone. The last time I was this excited about an upcoming season was when Lou Holtz was still pacing the sidelines. There's a lot of people that would agree with you on that. A lot of people.
Right.
And I think that leads into the discussion we had yesterday, Ryan, about the energy on campus this weekend was something like we haven't seen in a long time, even for home games in the season. So
right.
you are not alone.
And it's not fully, I mean, there has to be, there's a lot of varying factors to why that is, but I mean, you have to give obviously the big credit to Marcus Freeman. I think it's the fact that like, not only him being young, but like there's just a swagger about him. We just talked about energy on the offensive side of the football. Marcus Freeman just walks around and you just like notice the energy, you know? And I feel like the last couple coaches, it's like Brian Kelly did some good things, but like he wasn't a very like energetic, like
he wasn't
personality,
likable.
Right? Yeah, right.
People could respect the job he did. I don't know many people that actually liked him. The reality is you can respect your boss, but if you like your boss, the energy level is going to be a little different. It may not impact the outcome. Your production may still be there, but it's going to make it. I mean, you look forward to going to work every day instead of like, oh God, I got to do this.
Right. Well, even before him, it was like Charlie Weiss was just also kind of the same
Not
type of
likable.
vibe, right? Like, yeah. And I don't remember.
Wasn't likable.
I don't remember what Willingham was like, but
Ty was likable as a person. He just was unlikable because he didn't work. Like that's what you just didn't respect him. So Ty was likable. He wasn't respected because he didn't work. That was a big thing with him. 99 problems of a BK 8-1. Does the running back depth chart talent reduce the amount that Buckner's intentionally used as a runner? Design runs, keeps, or read options. Keeping Buckner healthy seems even more important after Pine Spring. I want to say one thing about the last thing. You cannot go through games worried about keeping your quarterback healthy. You have to call the game. Now, does that mean you're going to call 20 runs against Ohio State and then follow up with 20 runs against Marshall? No. I think that's where maybe say, okay, maybe we don't do as many of the designed runs against Marshall or UNLV, but you got to run your offense, Ryan, because if you're not running your offense because you're afraid someone's going to get hurt, then you're just not going to be that good. So, and then it doesn't matter who your quarterback is.
Yeah, I mean, there's parts of your offense that you're designing because you know what a dynamic player Buckner is with his legs, right? So I don't think it's intentional. Like again, to your point, there's going to be some times where you're just like, yeah, okay, we're not going to run him quite as much this week because we don't need to run him as much this week, right? But I think that you're not going to limit the impact that Tyler Buckner has as a runner because that is one of your biggest selling points as an offense is the fact that you have a quarterback that even when things break down or when you're scripting designed runs can affect the defense in a big way.
And if you establish it in some games, teams have to respect it in other games, even if you don't call it. And that's the thing. Like if you come out and let's say Tyler Buckner rips off a couple big runs in the first couple games, you may call just a pure inside zone, Ryan, where there's no read. And Tyler keeps the ball and runs around and like carries out his fake, and they respect it even though he's not even a remotely a threat on the play. And that's what that does. So you don't even have to call it for it to be a threat in a game. And I think that's the thing. But yeah, there will be times to your point that you're not going to call. You don't need to have him run the ball 20 times against Marshall or Cal or UNLV or Syracuse. You still want to run him though, because that's part of who you are.
Sure.
But maybe those are games where the scrambles are where he makes his plays. But against Ohio State, if you got to call 20 design runs to beat Ohio State, then you call 20 design runs to beat Ohio State. Same with Clemson, same with USC. That's what you got to do in those games. Because at the end of the day, you got to do whatever it takes to win. And if you play not to get your guy hurt, that's how you lose, in my opinion. Antoine Porsche Rideau, Brian and Ryan, do you see Jabron Payne being used as a slot receiver more than running back?
Not more than running back. No, I think that's just part of what he can do if you need that to be his role, right? Like he's one of those guys that we talk about, even similar to Jadarian Price. Like you would feel like he can be detached and play a different role because that kind of gives you optimal matchup, dictation. So I think that it can be a part of what you do, Antoine. But I don't think that. No, he's not going to be a majority slot receiver. I don't believe so.
Mm-hmm. Ryan asked, Michael Mayer matched up against Jack Sawyer in the pass game. He
Make it
has
happen.
Ryan has made so many comments to me about this because he watched the spring game and they're like dropping Jack Sawyer into coverage, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I cannot wait for that." I'll just say this: if that's a matchup opportunity, then Notre Dame needs to go to it.
A lot. Yes.
Yes. Adam Ziliak, what Notre Dame needs to be able to do is run when they need to, 3rd and 1 or 1st and goal at the 2. They couldn't do that last year. Here's my comment on that, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Notre Dame needs to be able to run it on 3rd and 1 and 1st and goal. But that turns in, and I'm not saying this about Adam. With some fans, that turns into you have to do that. I got into an argument one year, I think it was 2014 season, maybe it was 2013, where some guy was like, Notre Dame's offense sucks because they can't convert 3rd and 1s or 3rd and shorts. And then I went through and compared their stats like Bama and Ohio State from like the year before when they were like, or no, it's Bama from the year before. So I forget, it was a team that was really good the year before. Florida State maybe the year before. I forget what year it was. But anyway, no, it's 2013. It was Bama from the year before. I don't remember what year it was. It was a long time ago. I think Everett Golson was a quarterback. But the point I made is Notre Dame actually had a higher 3rd and short complete conversion percentage than those other teams. And so the response was, they didn't believe me. And then I provided the data. And I was like, well, it doesn't mean the same because they threw more than they ran. Like it turns into this whole, well, it's like, no, that's about your ego, right? Like if they're going to put 9 in the box on 3rd and 1, I'm throwing the ball to Michael Mayer because it may be a touchdown. I may be able to convert the 3rd and 1, but what if I can get an opportunity to score a touchdown because they're giving us this opportunity outside, right? So to me, I care about moving the chains and using those opportunities at times to create matchups. I think the problem last year, to Adam's question, if I'm reading his intention correctly, is they couldn't run it on 3rd and 1 even when they wanted to. And that's when you get in trouble. And you get into goal line situation, you're like, I don't know if they can punch this thing in there. I mean, how many times did it take them 3-4 plays inside the 5 to get in the end zone? And sometimes they still couldn't do it. And that part I agree with. But but some people that look at that, they look at that like, well, you know, if you don't run it on 3rd and 1, it's because you can, or you know, no, I don't care about how you get it. I care about getting it. Right. That's my stance on that.
Absolutely.
Josh Wahlberger, how much does Tobias Merriweather play this year? We had another one on him.
He
plays. I want to bring
this
up from Mitchell Coney. Mitchell with a super chat. Mitchell, thank you very much. He says, I think Merriweather could create an interesting position battle for the receivers. I wanted to bring those two kind of together because I think Mitchell's right. I think if Tobias Merriweather shows up physically, like he's put in the work this offseason, which I expect him to, and mentally ready to challenge. And here's something else too. In the past, young guys were often told, like, you know, hey, look, just come in and just develop. I have been told now I haven't talked to every kid, but every kid I've talked to, kid or parent, they have all told me that this coaches, whether it's Tommy Reese or Marcus Freeman, have told them, do not come in here thinking you're going to redshirt. Come in here ready to play. Now, that could change for offensive linemen, but skill players, all these guys, that's what they're being told. Linebackers, that's what they're being told. Don't come in here thinking you're going to redshirt. Come in here, be ready to play. Tobias has been told that. So I think he'll play. To your question, Ryan, until he gets on campus and we see how he physically stacks up.
Right.
And, you know, because he could be mentally ready to play, but if he physically isn't ready to play 50 snaps a game, then you can't play him 50 snaps a game. And what by physically, I mean, maybe he's only $180 and he's not strong. I mean, we got to see it first, right? But if he comes in and puts in the physical work, he'll play.
Right.
The question would be then is how much? And I think that's where Mitchell gets into it is I think Tobias Merriweather is going to have a huge impact on this offense this year, but it may not be his own individual production. Because when you get a kid like him that shows up, if you want to play somebody else, if you want to play, you better freaking bring it. Right. And that's what I said about Deion Colzie. The biggest impact Tobias Merriweather could have in 2022 is lighting a fire under Deion Colzie. Right. So now let's say Tobias catches 20 balls. If what I believe to be true or believe that could happen comes true, then you can't then Deion or Tobias doesn't just deserve credit for his 20 catches. He deserves some credit for whatever Tobias does. And that's the kind of the hidden impact that a guy can have. Like, hey man, you want to play, you better bring it because this kid is if Andrew Kristofic starts at left guard this year, I think he's going to be really good. And the reason I say that is because he has to be, and he knows he has to be. And so if he holds off Rocco and the other players, that means he's playing at a high level. That's what competition does. If Clarence Lewis is starting a cornerback this year, I can promise he's going to be a lot better than he was last year because he has to be. If he doesn't, he won't play.
Right.
And that's what I love. Like Ramon Henderson. If Ramon Henderson plays in the fall like he played on Saturday, he won't play.
Yeah.
Because there's other guys. And that's where you want to be. Like if we were talking about this at Mike Linebacker. JD and Bo Bauer. Look, if JD Bertrand's your starting Mike, he's going to be really good. Why do I say that? Because if he's not, he won't be playing. Right? I mean, it'll be Bower Jr. And that's the thing that excites me. And I think Tobias can really have that because right now I don't know if that exists at receiver. I don't know if there's a guy you can point to and say, you better do this, Dion, or you're gonna, but when Tobias shows up, it's a little different deal. That's just my.
And I think the word interesting popped to me too, Mitchell, because it's like he's one of the guys on the roster, Tobias, in theory, that can come in and can play multiple positions. So it makes it very interesting because it's not just like, oh, we got competition at W. He could play X. He could play all over the place.
And I like that Mitchell didn't say the boundary receiver. He just said receivers.
Exactly.
And that fits to what you were saying, Ryan, is it's not just the W. I think that's, from what I'm told, that's where he's going to start out like practice 1. But if there's a need somewhere else, Dion, he's going to be able to move. I think Tobias is a guy that can play all 3 spots. I do. He's not a guy that I'm putting in the slot for 50 snaps a game. He's so tall, I don't want to get his ribs broken. But there are some looks where I could say, yeah, put him in the slot and it creates some matchup opportunities for you. Chief Brody with a question. Tommy Reese or Jack Cohn? Who would you rather have a quarterback?
Jack Cohn. I mean, it's easy for me. I mean, I give Tommy all the credit as a player. He got about as much out of his talent level as you possibly could have at Notre Dame. Like, he was not a physically gifted player. But Jack Cohn is going to get drafted to the NFL this year, most likely, right? So there's a separation as far as talent level between the two, in my opinion.
Well, plus the other thing is if Tommy Reese is the quarterback, then who's the OC? So I mean,
it's a fair point. I didn't think about that.
But I agree though. I think Jack's a better athlete. I think Jack has a little bit better arm than Tommy did too. A little bit more accurate. Tommy's thing was up here. Tommy had everything you want in a quarterback right here and everything you want in a quarterback right here. He just didn't physically have the talent, and he'll tell you that. I mean, he said it publicly. I hope that I recruit quarterbacks that have more talent than I did. But here's what made Tommy great. He battled. He had heart and he was wicked smart. But the thing is, if he didn't have all those 3 things, he wouldn't have been on scholarship at Notre Dame because he didn't have the physical talent that other quarterbacks have had. If they can I be honest with you? This is partly why I'm so high on Dante Moore. Because I think Dante has a lot of those traits that Tommy had. He's a warrior. He has a lot of heart, and he's wicked smart mentally. Except Dante has 5-star physical tools as well, where Tommy didn't. And that's what I think is often overlooked about great quarterbacks. Most great quarterbacks have those other intangibles. Tommy had the intangibles. He didn't have the talent.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jack had more talent and some of the intangibles. Cuba Puig, what would the record be if we had our best version of Deshaun Kaiser? I know how most of the fans feel about him as a person, but just curious. Well, I think to your question, Cuba, is the best version of Deshaun Kaiser would have been a more mature Deshaun Kaiser, right?
Right. Yep.
And I don't think there's any doubt of the guys who started, Deshaun Kaiser was the most physically gifted quarterback that Notre Dame had. I think Everett threw the best ball, but Everett was 6 feet tall and 200 pounds. Deshaun was 6'4", 240. Ryan, you may disagree with this, but I'm not counting Phil Dracovic because Phil didn't start and his career still to be played out. But of the guys who started for Notre Dame from Brady Quinn until now, since Brady Quinn, so after Brady Quinn, Deshaun Kaiser had the best overall talent pack. Jimmy was the best passer, but Deshaun Kaiser's gap as a passer is much less than to Jimmy Clausen than his lead over Jimmy as an athlete and a runner, right?
I don't disagree with that at all. Yeah. Deshaun was an incredibly talented kid. There was no doubt.
Right. So the best version of him, what would the record be? If Deshaun Kaiser would have come back in 27, let's just say Deshaun would have been like, let's say Chip, he'd have sat down with Chip Long and Chip was just really told him the truth and like, here's where you need to be. And Deshaun was like, man, I got a great opportunity in front of me. I don't want to waste it. I'm going to come back. I'm going to be a better teammate. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to do all this. If he'd have come back in 2017, Notre Dame would have won a national championship. I wholeheartedly believe that. Because they don't lose to Miami if he's their quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they lose to Georgia they definitely don't lose to Georgia. I think there's a better chance Miami beats them than Georgia beats them, because that was game 2 for Georgia. Like, they weren't that good at that time. That was Jake Fromm's first start. They would have beat Georgia in that game if Deshaun, because they only lost by 1 with Brandon Wimbush.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I think you may disagree with this, Ryan, but I think because that was not a great Alabama. That was Alabama's worst title. There's teams that Bama's had that lost title, that didn't win titles, that were better than that 2017 team.
Was that the Jake Coker year?
No, that was 15 and 16 or 15. That was the year that Jalen Hurts got benched for Tua.
Gotcha. Yep.
So yeah, that was not a great Alabama team. So let me just pull this up real quick. So you had Jalen Hurts was the quarterback. Damian Harris was your top running back. Bo Scarborough was your number 2 running back. Najee Harris was just a freshman. Now, all that great freshman class that they had, those guys were all freshmen that year, and they had Calvin Ridley at receiver as well. And then the rest of their guys were freshmen.
Mm-hmm.
So, and their defense was good, but it wasn't like a typical vintage Alabama defense. It was good, though. They had, like, Quinnen Williams was a freshman. Minka Fitzpatrick was a great player on that team, but that was one of the like beatable Alabama teams, in my opinion, that year. And that was the team, if you remember, they got smacked by Auburn at the end of the year. They didn't play in the SEC title game that year. So they didn't win the SEC championship that year. And they beat a bad Clemson team in the semifinals. Like, that was the Kelly Bryant Clemson team.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Notre Dame would have won a title that year. Now, I don't think they would have in 2015 if it was, because Deshaun was just a redshirt freshman and the circumstances were a little bit different. Jules 602, did any receiver stand out more than the other? Ryan, I think we both agree that there's a very clear number 1 receiver for Notre Dame right now.
Yeah, Lorenzo Styles. Are you going there? Yeah,
Yep.
Yeah. Hey man, he's one of those other guys. I mentioned Tobias Merriweather. We've talked about Lorenzo a ton. He's another one of those guys that can play multiple spots at wide receiver, and I think he is. I think he's going to present a lot of mismatch opportunities, because there's going to be some times where I could see him put him in the slot and taking advantage of, hey, linebackers over him or safeties over him, or those two different degrees. Put him in the boundary against a guy that maybe is more of a boundary corner, where he's a little more, maybe a little tight, but he's going to try to get your hands on him. He has a good release. Like, there's a lot of profile and a lot of opportunities that Lorenzo Styles presents to you as lines up.
Got a few more here before we wrap up. Sean Kane says, what 2 defenses on Notre Dame's schedule matches up best with our offense? Clemson and who? So, like, what defense could present the biggest problems for Notre Dame offense? That's a really good question. I'd probably go with BYU, Ryan. Is there another one that you could look? I mean, BYU wasn't a great defense last year, but I think they're going to be better this year. They were a little bit up and down last year, but if I remember correctly, I believe they have a lot of dudes coming back. Like, yeah, I'm looking like their top 4 tacklers: freshman, sophomore, freshman, junior, freshman, junior, sophomore, freshman. They have everybody coming back.
Right.
And they were a little inconsistent last year. I think they're going to be better, but they're going to be physical. And that, to me, is the thing you got to be to match up against Notre Dame. You got to be physical up front. And even when BYU has bad defenses, they're at least physical normally.
Right.
So I can't think of anybody else.
It would be BYU for me. They have a bunch of guys like the Peyton Wilger kid at linebacker is a good player. He's coming back. They have size, and they're usually very mature for certain reasons, right?
and they've got everybody coming back. I mean, that's the other thing, is like they got so many dudes coming back. I think they got a couple transfers too. So you got, let's see, Truman Dumel says, what is your biggest overall positive from the blue and gold and the biggest negative watching it now? We look good, but we'll become elite very soon. Biggest positive from the blue gold game, I thought, was the speed of the team, especially on defense. That was the most noticeable thing. The biggest negative was Drew Pine not playing well. I really didn't think Drew played great in that game. And I think he's capable of playing better, and they need him to play better. So there's no doubt about that. Let's go to a couple more here before we wrap up. Oh, and Truman, I saw that you signed up for the message board yesterday. I appreciate that very much. I'm glad to have you on board. Kub also says my bold prediction is an upset. Is upset alert. We beat Ohio State the first game of the year. I'm just going on the premise that we can block the up front and rush the quarterback with a much better scheme. 28-24 Irish. I can dig that. That if they hold Ohio State's offense to 24 points, that would be very, very, very impressive. And then the last question here as we wrap up is that Cuba asks, is there any intel on Jacob Oden? How high are you guys on him as a player? The intel it's not a lot of intel. It's still kind of early in the process for him. Notre Dame likes him. He's definitely a guy that's on the board for Notre Dame. They've had him on campus multiple times. Him and his dad both like Notre Dame. The thing is right now, Notre Dame is still sort of in they're figuring out their board at certain positions, so they're not pushing for guys. I think if they pushed for him, they would have a really good shot for him. And the fact that they're not pushing for him isn't that they don't like him. They like him a lot from what I understand, but it's just more of hey, we got to figure out the board first. But if they make a run at, because like his dad's big time into the academic piece. His dad's a coach, I believe. He's big on academics. He really likes Marcus Freeman, both the son and the dad, which is why they've made so many trips to Notre Dame here in this offseason. So I think that there's a scenario in which if Notre Dame decides soon that they want him, they'd have a really good, I'm not saying they're a lock, but they'd have a really good shot to get him. I just think at this point in time that I think that's to be determined. But as of right now, it's super early. They're in a good position. And D-Troll Hunter, my bold prediction would be that Tobias will be over half the board's favorite player by the end of the year. That's an interesting one. And then here's the last question. This is going to be from Jay Montalbano. Do you guys think that Marcus Freeman will recruit to the level where Notre Dame has no weakness? Every year it seems we have at least one or more weak spots. I think everybody has weaknesses. There's been very, very, very few. Like even LSU in 2019, their defense could be scored on. Where if their offense was having an off day, you could outscore them. And Auburn almost beat them. I mean, so they weren't like invincible. Texas took them down to the wire that year, and that wasn't a great Texas team. So everybody has some level of weakness. I think it's limiting the number of weaknesses and then making it to where your perceived weakness in a matchup against Bama isn't significant. I think that's really the key. But I think that they're there. But look, that requires great recruiting year after year. If they sign the number one recruiting class in the country and then next year they're 15 because they get beat up for a bunch of kids, then that you're not going to compete with those teams. You're going to be better, but not elite. You got to recruit those kind of classes year after year after year after year. That's the key for me. All right. That is going to be it for the questions. So before we go, everybody, there's so many great questions today. I absolutely love the discussion. That's why we went way longer than we anticipated going. Ryan had to run for an interview. He's doing a lot of draft stuff. That's how long we went because you guys had some phenomenal questions. Great discussion. Enjoyed it a ton. Before you leave, my guy Mace AK isn't here with the reminders, but I think I can remember it. There he is, my man. There he is. That's what's up. Join the message board, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share the podcast. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. And as always, go Irish. So everybody have a great rest of your day. Just a quick reminder, we will have a draft preview show tomorrow on Thursday. Tomorrow night after Kyle Hamilton gets picked, we anticipate him being a first-round pick. Sean and I will go live probably about 20, 30 minutes after that to really break down kind of the latest. So that's why you need to have the notification bell on because when we set our show, it'll tell you what time. We'll probably, like I said, go about 20, 30. All good, Mace. Probably go like 20, 30 minutes after the pick is made, get our stories up and get our prep and all that kind of stuff. But we will have a show tomorrow night after it gets picked. We'll have our mailbag on Friday. And then probably either Saturday night or Sunday, we're not quite sure yet. Depends on how long the draft takes. We'll have sort of a draft recap show. And we'll go there. So make sure you sign up for the message boards as we always tell you. Join the message board. Tons of great discussion. Tons of great question. That's where we put all of our intel stuff. you're going to want to check on that again soon as well. So join us. We've been growing way past our projected numbers, but I want more. I want us to keep growing and growing and growing. I'm possibly may have a new recruiting guy jumping on board here soon. We're going to see about that, but that's all possible because of the work you all are doing as far as helping us grow. So keep doing it. Keep doing it. Keep helping us grow. And I told y'all, if you help us grow, I'll always reinvest back into the business to make it better and better and better. And that's what we're doing. So everybody, have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining the Irish Breakdown Podcast.